Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. The cafe hall was filled with tobacco smoke, noise, and clinking glasses. Here came the unattractive public who could not afford to drink champagne in the hotel restaurant, or who simply preferred light songs, funny pamphlets, and obscene dancing. Not everyone has to listen to Mozart. After all, there were merchants, noblemen with their ladies, two sailors, and a group of cheerful cadets in white caps and uniforms. Some were losing a game of billiards in the next room, and some were laying out cards on the table, hoping to get some easy money before the performance began. In the darkest nook, there was a company of young people, leaning back the chairs. Here sat two very young ladies, dressed in elegant evening dress and silhouetted like Greek goddesses, topped by their colorful hats with light felt boots that obscured the upper part of the face. Beside them, tucked leg over leg, sat their beau, a handsome young man in a black jacket, vest, and wide-brimmed hat. The girls were whispering among themselves and giggling softly, glancing at the cadets from time to time. And the young man was indifferently drawing something in his notebook, only occasionally glancing in the direction of his companions. "Emily, will you have enough wine?" Finally, he said, putting away his sketches. "You have to drive us home." "Mr. Paul, wouldn't you agree? I'm drunk. I can drive better than you. Sober." The girl was charming. She smiled, showing her big white teeth. Yes, and she herself was uniformly tall and clean-shaven. Her swarthy skin and curly brown hair gathered in the back gave away something un-Russian about her. "Spoons, I recall." Another one came in with fur, covering her mouth with her palm and winking at the field through her sheer veil. The second young lady had a doll-like face, as if made of porcelain, a head shorter than her statuesque friend. So together they made quite an amusing pair. "My dear, you know that Mr. Paul does not like to remember it." Emily looked reproachfully at her friend, and they both laughed. "You have jokes like teenagers. Maybe you should grow up." And finally, yawned the young man, hiding his smile badly. Apparently, the adventure at sea was really fun. "What am I doing here? It would have been better to sleep off the road or to see your mother as a dove, accompanying young ladies who can't go out in public without cavaliers because they would be considered prostitutes," Camille remarked. "Is that what everyone considers a prostitute anyway?" Paul nodded toward the billiard room. At that moment, the whirlwind in the gold-tinted bed was already flying toward their table, transforming into a blonde lavishly adorned with shiny bracelets and necklaces. "What did I tell you?" joyfully read the newcomer to her freckle-covered face and gushing with excitement. "I won $30 at poker." "3 is a lot, Paul." "Well, not so much," replied the young man lazily. "But can you pay for the wine?" Rolled her eyes blonde, staring at the table. "Why should I? Did I pay for you, boy?" The blonde called the waiter over. "I'd like a shot or a bottle of white rum for the young lady." "Let's have a bottle." As they say, let's go out, let's go out. Finally, the stage backstage began to spread slowly. The orchestra played a popular harbor tune, and dancers in bed and skirts and striped stockings ran onto the stage. "Look, I'm having so much fun. I'm going to get on the stage myself," the blonde said again, snatching a shot of rum and tapping to the rhythm with the heels of her exquisite beige shoes. "Hold that lunatic, because she's going to get some more." Camille nodded her head in her direction. "Gloria doesn't know how to have fun without a scandal. You don't know how to have fun at all. All night long you've been trying to put them on. Don't you have the guts to come over?" The blonde Gloria shook her head, and her hair spread even more. Rising swiftly, she was already standing at the table where the students of the cadet corps, who had recently returned to the city after the summer locations, were drinking. "Oh, shit," Emily whispered. "I have a bad feeling about this." "I have a bad feeling too," Camille confirmed, shifting her gaze from Gloria, who was waving her arms inspirationally at the cadets, who suddenly blew like horses, throwing interested glances at the girls. In a minute, 3 of them were already heading straight for their corner. The young men in the caps looked to be under 18, but they had their heads held high and their stance arrogant. Their leader, a red-haired, broad-shouldered young man, stepped forward, but did not laugh. "So you're the Russian." He stood directly in front of me, assessing her with his gaze. "Let's say," the girl said reluctantly, barely squeezing the cube. "My uncle died in the war," he declared loudly, blaring over the music. "Do you think I killed him? I wasn't more than 6 years old." Camille spoke calmly, leaning back in her chair and looking up at the boy who loomed over her. "Well, you have to answer for the sins of your parents." He gritted his teeth, leaning even lower over Camille. "Did you hit the girl?" Emily asked with feigned apprehension. "I'll collect my debt otherwise," said the cadet, and grasping Camille by the round chin, kissed her. The next thing happened so quickly that the entertainer did not even have time to finish his short monologue. Camille jumped up from her chair, her silk dress gently violet-colored for a rustle. The hat flew off her head, revealing a porcelain face and perfect hair. With a swift movement, the petite girl pressed the cadet against the beaten velvet wall, with one hand clutching his throat and the other pressing against his chest. Gloria clapped her hands together in delight. "Finally, you were having fun too. But Camille is always so unkind to men." "Let him go." "Stop it," Paul intervened, putting a wide-brimmed hat over his face. The young man's voice was low and hoarse, the kind that could block out any noise. She let go of the kittens, ended, and his companions looked anxiously at the frail maiden who had so swiftly silenced their friend. "It won't go away so easily for you." The lad sat spitefully at the girl and cracked his neck. "She's the ambassador's daughter." Rising from his seat, Paul turned to his grandfather. "If you want more trouble, then there will be not only kung fu techniques, but also samurai with swords." The cadets paid the price and hurriedly sat down in their seats under the noisy shouts of their comrades. What a marvelous evening. Gloria brought a shot glass. "It's a pity the dust has marred the whole cottage again. Would you like to go for a walk?" Stealing Camille. "So let me pull your ass out." They stood opposite each other, ready to claw at each other. A smile played on Gloria's lips. Camille clenched her teeth tightly. "Do you have a problem with guys?" "I think so. Or are you still terrified of them?" "I guess you'd never make a real wife." Camille was ready to forget they were in a crowded restaurant and not in a tatami gym. But Paul stepped between them, spreading his hands. "I think we'd better pay up and go out quietly. We're already the center of attention." The girls looked around and nodded briefly. Instead of listening to the chanson playing from the stage, all the customers were glued to their dark corner. Even Gloria didn't protest this time. They put the money on the table and were on their way out. A crowd of cadets blocked their way. This time there were twice as many of them. "First of all," said one of them, "we haven't had any fear of ambassadors for a long time." "What a fool," Paul parried, winking at the girls to move toward the door. While the lad was thinking, someone's arm swept across the fields. Someone toppled a table on the cadets, and in a moment the whole foursome was already running for the exit, knocking over waiters' feet and catching the hats of honorable merchants. The car was parked a little farther away. It was necessary to run down the slope. The car was just waiting to slide into its leather seats, and the passengers were rushing toward it with all their might, in spite of their tight dresses and high heels. By now, all four of them were laughing. Even enjoyed the laughter, holding up his black hat. Suddenly, the young man ran straight into a patrol in a dark blue uniform with gold trim. The cadets ran out after him, cutting off his escape route. "It's all right. Why are the ladies running out of the cafe?" the officer asked, looking away from the girls, who suddenly stopped laughing, covering their mouths with their palms. "Maybe you forgot to pay. Or are these brave fighters the future of the nation?" The cadets froze behind, waiting for disaster to befall them. "Paul, speak up," elbowing him. "You're a gentleman." But Paulus stood with his mouth open, caught on the young officer that, "Monsieur, you even took away your tongue." Gloria realized the first "sorry, Mr. Officer" but my Uncle Marcus ordered to bring me home by midnight. Putting her lips in a bow, the blonde held the maid by the sleeve of her uniform and added, "And it's 1:15. Mr. Gendarme, you don't want my uncle to be angry with both me and my friends, and at the same time with you, do you?" The officer cast a fastidious glance at Gloria, then nodded. The gendarmes parted, giving way to the young ladies and the field, who could not come to their senses. Glad to have the police guarding us, the blonde winked, walking past the military. "We are not the police, madam. We are gendarmes." Put his hand to his cap officer. "I am the staff captain of the gendarmerie. My name," but his name was drowned in the rumble of Emily's motor, pressed the klaxon, signaling gendarmes. We cadet girls waved their hands. Gloria sent a farewell air kiss, and the car rushed away from the noisy Grady Cafe. She said something to them. Crazy. Turning to Gloria, Camille whispered something to those academics. "Only the truth, sister. I mean, seriously." She was beating them up. Gloria said that the girl at the end table loves guys in uniform, but she can't dare to approach them first. "I'll show you some guys in uniform." And a black eye almost jumped out of the front seat. Camille. The girls laughed again, remembering all the events of that evening. Their first evening in the dressmaker's shop. Only Paul didn't laugh. Paul asked Emily bluntly at the bend. "Take the left," replied Paul, gripping the leather seat of the car. "Why do you have such a gloomy face?" Emily looked at the young man in the rearview mirror, turning onto the boulevard. "Okay, already having fun." Even in spite of Gloria's silly shouting, I would ask precisely because of Gloria's silly shouting, came from the back seat. Paul took off his hat, combed his wavy blonde hair into a bob cut, untied his neckerchief, and looked dreamily around at the distant sickle moon. If you looked, you could realize that melancholy, and Paul is not a guy. "Oh, did you recognize that officer?" Camille asked. "You were just stunned in front of him." "That's not like you." "Aha, only I," answered the girl in a man's suit, keeping her eyes on the sky. Now her voice no longer sounded as low as before. In addition, it was taking on a sad note. "I think I was friends with him once, and he didn't seem to recognize you." Gloria put her arm around Paulie's shoulders. "I guess he's not used to seeing you as a boy, but he thought I was a boy even then. Maybe I've just changed a lot. I was only 12, and he was 17. He was chasing ballerinas and choristers. He's handsome. That's the kind of guy I like. You look at him, and you know he's a hero." The car pulled into the yard of an unassuming gray house near the bazaar. Emily was parking. Camille was humming a French song. By the way, suddenly Paul was talking about Paul again. "Guess what his name is?" Emily tossed Rick. "Christopher. His name is Paul." The girl in the men's suit brought her eyebrows together meaningfully. Slowly, she got out of the car. It was quiet on the outskirts of the city. Here one could hear only candles, Canny's dog Woof, and the rustling of hedgehogs in the bushes. Barely had the girls left the car, quietly making their way into the house, when an electric light came on the first floor of the unassuming estate. 3 men stepped out on the threshold. The old, chopped-up Mr. Stephen, followed by the housekeeper, Mrs. Evelyn Poe, a seated woman with soft features and kind eyes, and her son Christopher, a stocky fellow. "Was it fun?" the host asked mundanely, leaning on a cane, the top of which was carved from ivory and shaped like a lion's head. The girls bought it. "Oh, you've already arrived," snatched up Susan. "We were just exploring the city." Gloria started to justify herself. "I'm afraid you were conducting a reconnaissance mission." Stephen was as grim as ever. "Isn't that why you brought us here for practice?" Gloria didn't stop, taking her hands to her sides. "Who told you you were still practicing?" Grandpa's voice echoed to such a thunderous pitch that a chill ran down the girls' backs. "That is, with just her lips," Emily whispered. "If we are not in practice, then on our first run," finished her sentence Stephen. "Is the order to stay quietly at home and not to poke your nose into the streets so incomprehensible to you?" The girls bent, and the man came close to Gloria's breathing. "Have you been drinking a lot? Well, now we'll see who drank more. Come, my darlings, to the basement. Alex and I have everything ready for you." The maidens, who a quarter of an hour ago were belligerent Valkyries, looked at each other and silently obeyed the old man. They went down into the cellar on woozy legs and now looked fearfully at the wooden chairs in the corners. "Good God, what have you come up with this time?" The blonde girl was horrified. "Which one of us is first?" "Gloria, you talk too much. Get your heart over here. It's unseemly to lock a young lady in a basement." The girl with the eye on Christopher. "But when has that ever stopped you?" "Sit down," Christopher's grandfather ordered. And Gloria sat down. Her body was held in place by a leather strap. "Stephen, really, this is too much," whispered Camille, stretching the top button of the closed dress. He only gave her a hard look and ordered her to do it next. In a few minutes, all four were already sitting in corners. "Hold their heads. How will Mrs. Evelyn vomit?" Stephen turned to the housekeeper, who was watching without a shadow of emotion. "I am very angry. Very. But what can you do? I need them all in good health for tomorrow," said, and left the cellar, leaving the girls in the company of the silent lady's boyfriend. Winter was for Stephen a time of vacation, which he had arranged for himself. Such vacations he arranged very rarely, because he simply did not know how to track. Under Egyptian palm trees, or at least half an hour to sit in a coffee shop. But old age was taking its toll. His joints ached, and his head was just about ready to explode from 100 thoughts, tasks, plans, and algorithms. He was advised to go to the waters or live a few weeks in a Buddhist temple in the Himalayas, but Stephen stubbornly chose the tailor shop. For one thing, it was relatively close to home. He took the train and got up at the station. And secondly, it was rumored that Stephen had a pace here. Of course, no one talked about it in public. And if anyone in the asylum did mention it, it was only as a joke. In general, Stephen was as far from romance as one could imagine. Sokolnicki, an old man with silver hair, sideburns mustache, and always clean-shaven chin, unusually strict, could have been anything but a lover. That's what teachers and students thought as they saw his sleigh moving down the snowy forest road toward the train station. Stephen, instead on the crab, started himself a valerian drink with hawthorn and tried to sleep. His head ached terribly, so he was determined not to get into any trouble this time for any money. At least for a week, he would have a miserable 7 days to himself. "Stephen." The porter opened the doors of the theater box before the gentleman. "It is good to see you again, madam," and he bowed low to his companion. The woman blushed thickly and entered the box. Of her it was safe to say plain, middle-aged, of medium height, uncertain, dim, hair colored from time and tears in her eyes, a few wrinkles on her forehead and in the corners of her eyes. "I'm always embarrassed when I'm with you." The woman threw a white shawl over her shoulders, hiding under it a new dress brought from Vienna. "When I think about it, you have all the girls in your orphanage lush, kings, young, smart. Why do you still come to see me?" "Stephen." The rental lasted when he was around this supposedly ordinary woman. The words kept getting stuck in his throat. "Just say the word, and I'll take you to the orphanage. One word from you, Evelyn." I went to the ladies' room for a second. The woman interrupted him, rising from her chair. The old man was leaning with both hands on the red velvet banister. He was looking at the crystal chandelier and the golden cubbyholes in the decoration of the opera hall. The Kapelle Ballet, or as it was called, the Blue-Eyed Beauty, Stephen had seen 3 times already, but had never yet been to it with Evelyn. He smiled at his light-hearted teenage thoughts. It's true what they say, it's a pain in the ass. A gray hair in the beard. Evelyn had been married 10 years ago when they first met in Porto, and now the woman was out of his reach. He could occasionally write letters, passing them through secret exiles, furtively take her hand, visit the dressmakers once a year, and dream of the time when Evelyn would finally leave the bedside of her ex-husband, a petty official of the Southwestern Railroad and owner of several revenue houses. On a waterfall of thoughts, Stephen didn't even notice the look on the kid's face as he moved briskly between the rows in the parter. The boy was no more than 12. He seemed to be well known here, especially by the young nobles and officers. The medics picked his pockets with notes. Stephen, satisfied the squint of his eyes was well trained, so he immediately realized to whom those messages were addressed. He realized something else too. That boy in the green, plaid t-shirt was actually a girl. Yes, she was a real girl. Mrs. Evelyn returned. Soon the performance began. The white tutus of the moth ballerinas were flying into the air. The music was mesmerizing. Evelyn's hand, lying so submissively in his arm, it all seemed to Stephen a miracle, a real vacation, which he undoubtedly deserved. And yet he couldn't get the girl in green out of his mind. Barely through the end of the first act, Stephen went down to the cafeteria. The occasion was very convenient, for every respectable gentleman should treat a lady in the theater with champagne and candy. It was indifferent that with his wealth he could order at least a dozen bottles directly into the box. No sooner had the venerable gentleman got in line than the greenish hue was snatched between the tucked-in tails and satin dresses of the theatricals. Stephen listened. At his age, the ability to listen is dulled. But if you train all 6 senses for 40 years in a row, in particular, intuitively, then in your old age you will begin to notice things you would not want to. I mean, he came here on vacation. He's on vacation. The hell with him. The young lady accepted the ring. Accepted it. So what's the point of getting cocky now? Prima ballerina, came a muffled voice from behind a heavy velvet curtain. It smears that already not old noblewoman ardently persuaded the boy to arrange a date with the wise waist model and performer of the main part. I'll give her this. Do you hear your name? Livewire, huh? I'll tell my lady I'll be waiting for her after the ballet. You got it, boy. I got it. But you don't understand me. Barely containing his irritation, the boy replied. He answered firmly, without twists and fears. I'm telling you for the 3rd time, the mistress has a migraine today, and she has 2 more acts to dance with this migraine. Next week, she'll have a cordial lunch with you, write you a contract for another ballet. But not tonight. Do you understand? Not today they'll send for you. Zippy. Above the window in the foyer, and stealthily, so as not to disturb the guests, pulled the sleeve of a tall blond man in a blue suit, slipped a wrapped paper into his palm. That fear vanished between the men. The blond man smiled. Is this how ballerinas get their dates? Stephen thought, and stepped a few steps behind the boy, as if he had inadvertently put his cane under his feet. The child stumbled, but kept his balance. Then the gray-haired grandfather, who looked as if he were about to collapse, suddenly grabbed the boy by the scruff of the neck and threw him to the floor. You don't have much of a sniff around here. Or maybe you're picking up honorable people. Let me see your pockets. Well, it's coming out. What do I see in there? A gold watch or a purse? Instantly on his feet, the lively man bowed to Stephen. I'm a messenger, Mr. Messenger. And what are you sending? I can't turn out pockets. I say, sir, it's confidential, confidential. And my watch is also confidential. A crowd was gathering around. A blond man in a suit also approached, stood for a few seconds, but said nothing. Hit me if you want, turn me in to the police. But I didn't steal anything. I'm a messenger, and it's not dignified to read other people's letters. May you be a simple laborer, or the prince himself. The fat man replied sharply, shooting his big greenish eyes. All right. Suddenly softened the old man. If you are a messenger, then arrange a date for me with Mademoiselle Prima. With a respectful gesture, Stephen took the ruby ring off his finger and held it out to the child. But the boy only turned his nose up at mistress. It's not for you. It's not for mistress. It's for you. Do you know how much you can buy with this ring? Did you have a messenger? And he poked me contemptuously. Do you think you can buy everything in the world? What can't? Dignity, sir. The boy picked up a cartouche from the floor, waved it, and put it on his head with reverence. The first theater bell rang. Looking around the crowd, peering curiously at him, the boy cast one more glance at Stephen, put his hand on his visor in farewell, and disappeared into the maze of theater corridors. Stephen, he laughed, and did not hear someone take him under the elbow. What was it? A pale Mrs. Evelyn was staring at him. "Why did you pounce on that child?" The man coughed, covering his mouth with his hand. The youthful demons were playing into his, "Are you the color in their eyes? How can I tell you? In short, I promised not to work for at least a few days. But you see, it's not working. Did you suspect that this mouse is a girl?" Surprisingly, Mrs. Evelyn nodded in agreement, keeping Stephen's sad, gray eyes like morning mist. "I know this little one. Her name is Camille. She's our daughter, the lodger, you know. Her mother, a former ballerina, got knocked up by a suitor so ardent that he promised her a golden mountain and in the end left her with a child. It's a story as old as the world. Jenna, our tenant, was a child herself. Her parents from Kazakhstan, teachers, both such a quiet, intelligent family of this risk a word to no one, decided to leave a child, give birth, and bring up. Well, and from the theater she, understandably, thrown out. And what do you want to recruit this girl? She has grown up," sighed the old man. "How old is she?" 12. "I knew it. We have a rule we only take in orphans, and not older than 10. There's a second call. Gotta go. I still haven't gotten you any champagne." "It's empty," said Evelyn, finally releasing his elbow. "You know, I think she really is the one you're looking for. You can convince me anything, old man." Mistress Evelyn smiled faintly for the first time all evening. "What does your sixth sense say?" The woman asked quietly. "It has never let you down, has it, Evelyn? I can't just break the rules. Rules that you set up yourself. All right, if you can convince yourself, then come to the address. What did I write?" Evelyn handed over a piece of paper torn from her notebook. "Isn't this a beer hall? Like a variety show or a cafe?" Evelyn nodded, and again a faint smile appeared on her face. "And you thought I didn't go to such low-key places? Nah, I'm just in favor of," embarrassed, Stephen. For the first time in a long time, he was truly embarrassed. Evelyn knew as much about him as no other living soul knew. But for the first time in 10 years, she felt like his accomplice ally in his spying endeavors. For the first time in a long time, a lively light flashed in her eyes. And for the first time, Stephen thought about the fact that from the beginning Evelyn had been interested in being less his mistress than his associate. Well, then the vacation was definitely off. The next day, Stephen sat in a rather decent box at the Variety Theater. As you walked along and watched Mrs. Evelyn greeting acquaintances in the parterre. Here at the establishment, there was more chance for a middle-class, married woman to be compromised. But soon Evelyn walked confidently into his box and sat down next to him. "I was asked why I was here." "And what did you say?" Jury prize in the eye. Stephen mirrors out the teenager's 10 graying eyebrows. "The truth. I'm helping a recruiter find new talent for his theater. And I got a theater. If your young ladies are putting on a show like you did yesterday in the opera lobby, how is that any worse than theater?" Her last words were interrupted by loud music. A march was played, and dancers in close-fitting hussar uniforms and shortened skirts appeared on the stage. Barely covering their knees, they were followed by a whole gypsy chorus. Then some painted and not at all funny clown tried to flirt with the ladies present. There was a python tamer. 2 specially invited American dancers threw their legs up in the company of an entertainer with a monkey on his shoulder and held a beauty contest among those present. And the pamphlet The Atheist mocked the shortcomings of bourgeois society. When a large and fashionable lady belted out, "Oh, I'm a maiden." And it was 0 o'clock. "You're tough, Stephen. My patience ran out. I've been looking for her all evening. Where's this girl who's causing me so much trouble and mental anguish?" Mrs. Evelyn looked at her companion with disapproval. "Do you trust me, Stephen?" Under that gaze, full of tenderness and a feminine strength he had never seen before, The man gave up. He leaned back in his chair and stopped waiting. And at the same moment, a swing suspended from the ceiling came out of the backstage under the thunder of applause. Above it, with one leg tucked under him and the other hanging down, sat a sad Pierrot in a black and white tricot suit. A small tear was drawn on his left cheek. 2 faces were cremated behind him. The orchestra played Vivaldi, and Pierrot on the swing ended to the beat of the music. "Is that her?" Breathless, whispered Stephen. It was her, and Tanya could not take her eyes away. The creature seemed to have no bones. The girl easily tumbled on the swing, did somersaults and backflips, reached with her toes. Her every move was weighed to the inch. One miscalculation and lay her mangled on the wooden platform. But she knew what she was doing. Her gaze clung to the spectators. And Stephen noticed how the story of the unfortunate Pierrot had made more than one young lady in the audience stealthily wipe her eyes. "Have you convinced me?" That's all Stephen could manage to say, smiling and clapping his hands with the audience. "This chick should join our flock." Camille was wiping off her makeup in front of the mirror when her worried mother approached her, still dressed in the shiny corset and short pink pantaloons in which she had danced the last number. Jenna took her daughter by the shoulder. "Zippy, there's a gentleman here to speak to us. He says you stole a gold watch from him yesterday. Is that true?" "Mom," the young one said indignantly, and so loudly that the whole dressing room turned its head. "You know I'll never take someone else's," the girl said quietly, biting her lip. "This man has come to blackmail her. He wants Camille to set him up with Mrs. Prima. He's so old and gray-haired, and yet he's there." The girl clenched her fists angrily, determined to escape. But in the dressing room already entered the owner of the theater, lanky Stepan Oligovich, leading under the arm of the same gray-haired old man. "Maybe you have a separate office?" affectionately asked the grandfather, putting in the owner's hand a few coins. "Bring this one in there, you lively one, and the mommy as well." "Who is this child?" The clumsy Stepan Oligovich swung at Camille, just in time holding back his broad palm. "Go together as you are. Go in your makeup and in your native corset. Maybe you'll get some mercy from the Baron for your behavior. It's not for me to teach you." He slapped Jenna on the thighs. "On my income, all your bad theater is kept." What a bald teacher! The indignant Jenna took her daughter by the hand and disappeared behind the door to the study. Here kerosene lamps blazed, illuminated by cheap yellowish wallpaper and an unpretentious set. A table, a sofa, and 2 walnut chairs. "I see you're not very welcome at the theater," Stephen said mundanely. "Sit down on the fiddler and the sofa. You sit down too. I've heard a good proverb from you. There's no truth in feet. Never understood it until the Dan arthritis got to me." Despite the invitation, mother and daughter stood opposite the old man, not daring to sit down. Camille, in black and white tights with striped makeup, and Jenna, studded with sequins with a huge ostrich feather sticking out of her battered mustache of hair in a haphazard manner. "Tell me, lively, I'd better address you something else." Camille, old man, slyly tell me, can you read?" "What's the point of these questions?" The mother intervened, stepping forward and covering her daughter. "It's because, dear Jenna, I am the founder and honorary guardian of the orphanage. You can call it a school for gifted children." "I never went to school," Camille replied, confused. "I can read, but I can't write very well. I don't think I'm talented." Suddenly she added, "And I'm still not going to arrange a date with the lady, unless she wants to." "Sit down," the old man interrupted her. "Drink some water and prepare yourself for what I'm about to tell you. My name is Stephen. 20 years ago, I founded the Artemis Orphanage, an intelligence school for girls. We're not some charitable organization. We're a for-profit organization, independent of government, outside of government control. Artemis trains the girls to become top-notch spies, and upon graduation, they sign a 10-year contract." "That means I understand what it means," interrupted the old man Jenna. "If you take Camille in, I will pray for you until the end of the age. I'm a mom." "What are you saying?" "Mom, Jenna knelt down, folding her arms across her chest, and Stephen even had to stand up and lift her to her feet himself, and then make her drink 2 whole glasses of water. Get her away from here," the woman was still chanting. "Mommy, why do you wish me right?" You see, despite her daughter's protests, Jenna continued to turn to Stephen, grabbing at the hem of his clothes. You see, she is no longer a child, a teenager, almost a girl. She won't be able to pretend to be a boy for long, neither in the opera corridors nor on the stage. And then what? It's not proper for a decent young lady to curl up like a snake over the stage. The cabaret stage is so shaky, so unaffected. Circus fame, like a candle, flares and fades. You don't know how to turn from a star to a backyard girl. Camille. After listening to her mother, the old man turned to the girl. "Once in Artemis, you will have to forget about your usual life. You will disappear from this Emily without any goodbyes or explanations. Just tomorrow you will be gone, and your mommy will file a missing persons report with the police. Later they'll make a verdict. Missing in action, drowned in the Dnieper, fled to Canada to work. Camille Kakovskaya will disappear forever, just like the lively, like the sad Pierrot. And somewhere far away, many miles away, another 12-year-old girl will appear under a different name, an orphan adopted by the orphanage Artemis. Will I make it?" Camille spoke each word hard, as if they weren't words but fish bones lodged in his throat and blood dividing him from the inside out. "To see Mom again someday. The rules say you have to sever all ties with your family. But for you, I'll make an exception. You can see your mom, but only after graduation and your first successful assignment. How much time will that take?" Camille blurted out impatiently. "Who's what? Who gets his first assignment at 16A, who isn't even ready at 20? 18. That I'll get my first assignment. 18, and successfully complete it." Jenna burst into tears, dropping to her knees again and hugging her fragile Camille. Mascara was leaking into the early wrinkles on the still very young woman's face, smearing from her daughter's black and white suit. The town clock struck 0 o'clock already. Stephen said quietly, taking the hand of Camille, who stood motionless and stone-faced, without a single tear. "Mommy, wait for me. Don't be sick. Eat meat at least once a week. Fair. Once in a while, Mrs. Prima. You know she's very unhappy. And don't worry, I'll be back. You're Camille now. Remember that. I already have a Camille. To avoid confusion, you'll be called by different names. Sitting motionless on wooden stools is a very dubious pleasure. The other girls have already thrown up, and they're still tolerating it. Aunt Evelyn, is he going to keep us like this until morning?" She finished. "I can feel my legs not having legs. There's a mad cockroach bleeding about my head. And you indulge him. You can see Stephen's not himself. The years have taken their toll. Camille, our long acquaintance won't save you. There's no need to resort to pampering. To get rid of the punishment," Evelyn said calmly, settling down on the stool next to her son. "A fair one, by the way." Camille, haha. "So that's what Paul used to call you." Gloria laughed. "Oh my God, honey. I can't laugh anymore. My stomach hurts. Why the hell did you take the name Paul after your abandoned friend?" Camille intervened. "And how do you know Mrs. Evelyn?" Too many questions. Camille felt it, her head spinning. "Stephen, I always knew you wanted me dead. Worthless old man. Ever since the day he accused me of stealing his watch. You should have sewed me up on the spot then instead of torturing me for 6 years. Stephen," the voice no. Other voices have joined in. "Release us, please. We won't do it again. Damn you." "Release them, Christopher," quietly ordered Stephen, peering into the cellar. "Gathering at 6. That means you, my dears, have less than 4 o'clock to sleep. You too, Stephen. You too." Barely audible, Camille said, smiling evilly. She held onto the wall with one hand. She was lying on her back, watching a bug crawl over both of them. The candle flame flickered in the gusts of fresh breeze to the sigh outside, making the stuffiness of the August night less unbearable. Gloria, sharing the room with her, was still fiddling with the mirror. Her thin nightgown, adorned with expensive lace, had slipped off, concealing freckles and forearm-long, thick hair scattered behind her back. "Why did you come back?" Gloria tossed over her shoulder, noticing Camille's gaze in the mirror. That from the bug had shifted to her. "You want to tell me how you know Evelyn?" She put her hands under her head and stared dreamily through the ceiling, her gaze piercing the roof, instantly transcending space and time. "I was 8 when my mother got me into the opera house. She was a former ballerina, had connections among the dancers. She was friends with the 6th dancer in the 3rd row." He chuckled. "Yes, the 6th dancer in the 3rd row, rising to prima donna. And how else? I'm not going to be told anything at all." "I forgot that you have no sense of humor," shook her legs Gloria. I'm not talking. Too eager to hear about the youth of a handsome officer. That's how they got you into the theater as an errand boy, exiled between ardent admirers and their families. Let me guess with Gloria's squint. And Monsieur Paul at the time was a lively so-left critic, madly in love with the prima ballerina. A slight smile flashed across his face. No, he was not in love with Prima. He was in love with a red-haired dancer, with a new girl from the Corps de Ballet. Then again with some Christ. Gendarmerie Captain Hall has a big heart. Gloria twirled a strand of golden hair on her finger. But you were laying down for a sophisticated person like you. An ordinary womanizing boy wouldn't have been worth a blank slate. Am I wrong? One day I came to the theater before the morning rehearsal. My eyes, they were distant again, dreamy. It was Sunday. The deserted city seemed mysterious and sad. Even the janitors who sweep or fall in maple leaves every morning were nowhere to be seen. At the front door of the theater, with his back resting on a marble slab and hiding from the rain, sat a cadet in a white uniform with red epaulets. He was writing something in a notebook, all to the side. I looked over his shoulder. You know, I was expecting to see a corny love letter or teenage pathos. Love your eyes. Kiss your hands. What was that? Gloria was fighting sleep. Her curiosity was still winning. Fatigue. Everyone has their own paradise to the point of exhaustion. Everyone has their own dream. Who could still sleep off the delirium of dreams? Worried heart, weeping with excitement, unheard at night on the heart of Surgit. With what have you climbed to the seal? Bravo, bravo, Monsieur Paul. Clapped his hands Gloria, finally set the candle, and dived under the sheet next to the girl. Who knew you were so romantic? Shut up. Camille rudely cut her off, moving to her side of the bed and pulling the sheet over. Gloria laughed some more, but soon her breathing was quiet and even. Outside the window it was light. The morning roosters crowed loudly in the yards, and tits began to crow in the trees. When Camille finally dozed off, she dreamed of her childhood. A cranky prima ballerina with her mood swings, broken vases, screams, tears, and crude station house profanity. Dreaming of hours of grueling variety show training, the drunken sensation of the stage, and hundreds of eyes piercing into you, waiting to see if a bird would fly up or shatter everything like an expensive Chinese mistress vase. You dream of the piercing, sharp hunger with which you go to bed and wake up knowing that the next performance is a week away and there's no money for bread. And then there's the russet-haired cadet that tells you all the secrets, thoughts, dreams, and love affairs. He can talk, and you can listen so you know everything about him. And he knows nothing about you, and he doesn't even suspect that you are a girl in short pants and a green jacket who races through the corridors of such a majestic and unattainable, decorated with new velvet and gold theater. And then there was nothing. Only snow-covered spruce forests and mountains covered with snowcaps. On that winter day, the sun shone so strongly. Did it hurt your eyes? Stephen put the round glass of his sunglasses on his nose, and all that was left was to move his cap harder and tangle himself in the gray terrycloth scarf. he had bought at the station from a street vendor. The farther they drove away from the house, the harder the girl's heart pounded. And when their sleigh pulled up to the big treacherous gate, which obviously served as the only entrance and exit to the impregnable walled fortress, she generally almost jumped out of her chest. While the travelers waited for someone to open the deadbolt, the girl looked around, trying to get a grip on herself. What does it say? She turned to Stephen, pointing to an inconspicuous plaque above the gate with an inscription she couldn't read. It says the name of our orphanage in German Artemis. The man nodded and began to explain. There was such an ancient Greek goddess of the woman driver, hunter, owner of the moon. We are in Germany. Camille interrupted at half a word, looking at him with big, intelligent eyes. We are in Galicia. These lands are now under the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I see, she answered briefly and tangled herself tighter in her scarf. That's all you want to ask. You haven't said a word all the way here. I have 6 years to learn everything I want to know, said like a girl cut off. And Stephen whistled. The decision to bring very young orphans to the orphanage was no mere whim. The little children, knowing no other Emily and having no relatives outside the wall, perceived Artemis as a single family, a single authority, and a single truth. The old man scratched his clean-shaven face and chin and sighed. His Camille was an experiment that could undo all 20 years of hard work, or maybe, on the contrary, become a breath of fresh air, an example to the perverted. Artemis. While Stephen pondered, the gates opened. Horses charged, and the sleigh leisurely drove into the territory of a luxurious estate with marble statues and fancy gazebos, ice slides, and skating rinks, where little girls under the supervision of a nanny were added. In the distance there was a greenhouse, behind the glass walls of which the stiff-eyed passers-by were grown-up girls. The children rushed towards us with joyful shouts that the coachman had to hold the horses. Stephen is back. You're early, aren't you? The gorgeous lady in a fluffy coat the color of snow came up to the soldier. I see the vacation has come to an end, she added, glancing at Camille. Stephen, what are you doing? Has the boy been brought to us with blood? Covered freckles, nose, brown eyes. A girl in a short, colorful coat. No, Gloria, you're wrong. It's not a boy. Take a closer look. Gloria bent her head well, like a long neck, and goose gazing at an obscure stranger, a packed path. From that look, Camille was going down. Stephen, you said that only pretty girls are taken to Artemis, because spies must necessarily be pretty. This one is, honestly, not very pretty. At the pout of her lips, the blonde held her tongue. Laurie raised her voice at her. The woman in the white coat, and Stephen stopped her with a wave of his hand. More and more of the small female residents of the orphanage converged, eyeing the new arrivals with interest. You know, my dear Gloria, during these few days I suddenly realized that we need not only beautiful, but also gray and unremarkable Artemis, who can disappear in the crowd, whom everyone in the city will see every day, and then will not even remember the face. Stephen's eyes, so calm and deep, slid over each of the girls until they stopped on the blonde again. So you're making a mistake. Beauty comes in many forms. Take a closer look at Laura, and until we do, don't jump to conclusions. Stephen signaled the coachman, and the sleigh drove on, all the way to the Grand Palace. It is made of white brick, faced with colorful tiles with a spire, wooden balconies, galleries, and a large clock on the central tower. This is your new home, addressed Camille affectionately by Mr. Frau Wendy. The housekeeper called out to him. Be kind, prepare a room for the new girl, give her linen, school uniform, and feed her. What am I telling you? You know everything yourself. The dark-haired Frau Wendy, quite young for her position, smiled back. She's so mature. She poked Edic's tongue into my little hedgehog. It will not be easy for you among our pet snake carcasses. Let's go, my orphan. I'm not an orphan. Camille cut me off, flashing her greenish things. I have a mother. Mrs. Wendy, only surprised at Stephen. And the latter nodded. What should I call you? Have you already thought of a new name? I have. Not for bags with the answer, said Camille, taking off a sharp cartouche from the swifts on his head. Paul. I'll be called Paul from now on. The housekeeper coughed, hiding a smile behind that cough. Having corrected her apron and slave-length hollow skirt at the edges of her crimson, Frau Wendy gave the girl a gentle nudge in the back, and together they entered the spacious hall of a building that looked simultaneously like both a forest hut and a royal palace. Even for the regulars of the opera, this house seemed amazing. Seemingly unreadable things were harmoniously combined here. Camille raised her head, looking at the large chandelier of greenish crystal, trying hard not to show surprise. The girl didn't notice the snow falling from her shabby scrolls under the standing snow, leaving puddles, and her obscurely colored boots 2 sizes larger spreading muddy water all over the front hall. The front door creaked loudly behind her, and a flock of teenage girls flew in from outside. Camille was able to get a better look at them now. They were really all beautiful, and they were all dressed up like young ladies, all with their pretty hats, their little jokes, and their warm gloves with bows on the cash register. If Camille could draw, she would have painted a portrait of each of them. Girls, get acquainted. Mrs. Wendy addressed them affectionately. This is Paul. Weigh in, they bent. Isn't that a man's name? And how old are you, Paul? Stepped forward Gloria, looking defiantly straight into Camille's eyes. 12, she answered, holding her gaze. And I'm 12. How long have you been trained? Trained? Well, you know how the agency trains first in the field and then brings you to the orphanage. They started training me when I was 5 and brought me here when I was 7.5. I wasn't trained. Look, she wasn't even trained. Gloria looked around at the other girls. Tell me you have parents, and I have a mom. Camille raised her chin proudly. Mom, everyone exclaimed. Artemis came closer and closer. The circle closed, and it seemed to me that even the housekeeper became awkward. Girl, pushing Gloria away. The unearthly maiden came close. Do you even realize where you're going? This is an orphanage. No one here has moms or dads or even great aunts. And if you're so special, you should go back to your mommy instead of bragging to us. Frau Wendy couldn't stand it and stared. Her cheeks were as red as grated beets. If she was here, there must be a reason. Stephen wouldn't bring the new Artemis just for no reason. What do you think? She's so gifted. Gloria flared up. I speak 7 languages, 4 of them without an accent, knocking out 8 out of 10 targets with a revolver. I know geography and history at the level of university students in me. I know life. Abruptly punctuated her speech. Camille, while you grew up and blossomed here as a type of nickname, I struggled every day to survive. So cut me some slack and don't ever speak to me again. All of you. She turned around to the rest of the girls. Y'all don't ever talk to me again, she said and ran up the stairs. Mrs. Wendy only shook her head disapprovingly, looking at the young Artemis with disapproval, and picked up the hem of her long skirt and headed after Camille. Don't take it personally. They're not mean. They're just too stupid. Mrs. Wendy switched to Russian, catching up with the new girl. You're from the dressmaker to the chicken, aren't you? Camille nodded. They climbed the wooden stairs, creaking with every step. Bright multicolored light streamed in from the stained glass windows, casting sun bunnies on fallen cheeks. Girls, you eat some sleep, and then meet Vanessa in the evening. She introduces you to the local customs. Draw up a training program with you. Stairs, and then there's the 2nd floor, 3rd floor. We have 32 girls living here, trying to cheer Camille up. Next is the young housekeeper, occasionally adjusting her handkerchief. Oh, we miscalculated. 33. Each has a personal training plan and specialization. Marietta, for example, is immersed in history and international law. Emily and Sarah work with technology. Lakshmi is best at martial arts. 3 things to do. Next up is Mrs. Wendy. She was unstoppable now. We also have prodigies like Gloria and Camille, who you just met. Their minds work many times faster than other people's. Oh, 5th floor. There are only free rooms here. The housekeeper opened the doors, and Camille found herself in a small room, clean and bright, nestled just under the roof. In the corner stood a table decorated with a net napkin. Next to it was a desk, a closet, a dressing table with an electric lamp, and just in case, a kerosene lamp. Everything was small, teenage, just enough to fit. And in the middle was a bed, over which a roof with a huge window overhung. In that window was a blue winter sky. Having such a sky above their heads, they were willing to bitch about anything. In the evening, she would see the sun off over the mountains, and at night, the moon would shine on her. The same month as her mother's, the same as Mrs. Primate's, and certainly the same as Paul's, who would never know where the lively boy, the messenger, the prima ballerina, and his missing friend had gone. Camille sank helplessly on the bed and stared off into the distance. After standing in the doorway for a little while, the housekeeper sighed and walked out, leaving the new girl alone with her sorrowful ones. Mademoiselle Vanessa paced the room on the mountain night had fallen. Out of the blue, the wind came up and conquered the windows. Vanessa took it as a bad omen. She even thought she could hear wolves howling in that bucket. She wasn't afraid of anything in this world, not of spiders, not of the dark, not of death, which had already looked in her eyes 100 times. But wolves, for some reason, made her afraid, probably since her grandmother first told her about ghouls. Mademoiselle Vanessa was afraid of everything that could not be explained rationally by the laws of physics. For example, there was no way she could explain why Stephen had brought this 12-year-old girl who wasn't even an orphan. What does he think he's doing, that crazy old man? He's been a weirdo all his life, but he's gone completely insane. Now he pretends to have a headache, so he sleeps in his room. Mademoiselle Vanessa snatched her white fox coat from the chair and threw it on angrily. A strand of hair dislodged from beneath her masterfully arranged gilded hairpin, flew out of her eyes, hit the floor. Mistress. The housekeeper knocked on the door, peering into the study. I've brought the new girl. Just get her started. Mademoiselle bellowed, sipping a white lace wall. I can't stand it. She's guessing. The old grandfather will never tell us what he's thinking. He always wants us to look at his charades. And she was not standing in front of Mademoiselle Vanessa, eyes downcast and timidly clutching her new grassy green skirts. She was looking at her own reflection in the glass of the sideboard and was even more indignant. Apparently Camille was uncomfortable in her Artemis school uniform. So tell me. Vanessa sat down on the table in front of her, putting her leg over her foot. This was the same woman who had first greeted the new arrivals. The same gorgeous lady with flashing eyes lined with black arrows, a pointed nose, and a swan neck that revealed the deep neckline of a velvet dress. What is there to tell? The girl looked up at her, shifting from foot to foot. Is your collar too tight for you? Or were there no shoes in your size? And what's the matter with your hair? It's just awful. Don't bite your lip, ma'am. My name is Miss Vanessa. I am the headmistress of the school and Stephen's right hand here at the orphanage. The girl glanced incredulously at the woman, Mademoiselle Vanessa. Pardon my impertinence, but you are no more than 25 years old. You are. And you are indeed impertinent and straightforward. The headmistress moved to the edge of her seat. There's plenty of chair. Not every girl who comes into my office can speak so freely. But I'll answer you. I'm 32 years old. I was the first of Artemis and now have the honor of leading the school. I saved a queen from an assassination attempt, stopped a military conflict in Africa, and saved a relic of an important dynasty. What about you? What about you? I'm 12. For over 3 years, I pretended to be a boy to earn money and get out of debt. And I wore boyish clothes. So this is the marketplace. Skirt, stockings, anything that doesn't squeeze and slip down. I'd gladly trade it all in for a comfortable pair of pants and a tight shirt. Wear whatever you want on your day off. And please come to class in uniform. It's people like you we make ladies out of. I hope your hair's growing fast, or you'll have nowhere to put a bow." And they were about to give birth to the mouth, but Mademoiselle Vanessa interrupted her with an appropriate gesture. "You don't speak English, do you?" "No, ma'am." "So what hole did they pull you out of? Can't you at least speak German and French?" "I know some French words. My friend is French on my mother's side. He often inserts phrases, words, phrases." Vanessa's grabbing her head. "Tell me honestly, for what talent and special merits Stephen brought you here?" And did not tread on the spot. Her cheeks reddened, and her hands clutched harder at her skirt. "Maybe because I can dance," the girl said hesitantly. "Dance?" That made me laugh. "All right, you'll have a dance. 4 o'clock in the ballroom." By then, Mademoiselle Vanessa began to write quickly with an automatic pen. "Can you even read? I'll give you a routine of 7 o'clock outside, then breakfast, geography with the youngest, individual French with Madame Denise, riding, horse care, lunch, then English, 7 years, science, and then you're dancing. Can you hold it, or can you run away?" "I will hold out." Mademoiselle Vanessa bowed her head in a bow. "Camille, may I kiss your hand?" Vanessa could see the new girl's fingers trembling, her shoulders settling with hers. She could feel how much the girl wanted to turn around and run for her eyes away from this place, despite the blizzard and the silly night. She smiled predatorily and put her hand up for a kiss. Not a kiss. Calm, measured, submissive. Madame Headmistress sighed faintly. She knew such girls well, born penniless. The only treasure they had was pride. Not the deadly sin of pride, but precisely pride. A steel rod, secure on earth and swiftly reduced to the sky, not allowing them to break. She knew because she was like that herself. Perhaps that was why Stephen had dragged her, this unlucky girl, to the ridiculous nickname. Paul is still chuckling quietly himself now, rereading Ivanhoe or the Divine Comedy for the 100th time. "I can't stand that old man for life. I'm out of." "Pro," grumbled Vanessa to herself under her breath. Almost left her office. In the morning, there were snowdrifts on the chalk. With difficulty, the front door was ajar, so Artemis, sleepily issuing from the stairs in his jokes and fluffy hats. Immediately shovels were handed out, and orders were given to clear the road. Not a bad job for the worn-out ladies. They reluctantly accepted the shovels and went into the streets to shovel snow. Camille's gray scroll and flowery green cartouche stood out among the bright and variegated colors. On her, the mirror, they whispered. Camille grasped the shovel's handle and concentrated on the job at hand. Pick it up and throw it away. Pick it up and throw it away. Is this what she would do? Follow orders and keep a low profile. 6 years should only last 6 years. A snowball flew straight at her head, knocking off her cartouche. The cold snow hit her by the scruff of her neck and began to melt quickly on her hot back. Who did that? Exclaimed back up Kleitnikov, keeping an eye on the girls no one admitted. Artemis only laughed, covering themselves with their sleeves. Who did it? I ask you. He said it again. Don't take it so hard. Gloria spoke in a honeyed voice, her lips folded in a bow. We're children. I don't care which one of us did it. I'm sure she just spilled it, kindly, childishly. Kind Sam coughed and melted, not a hum, and went back to work, right before the breakfast bell rang. Another snowball flew into Artemis' ear now. It was aimed and hard. Mrs. Agnieszka, the geography teacher, stood between the pupils and twirled a globe in confusion. She was plump. Her voice was high and now very excited. We are giving lessons in French. How are we to be? The 5 girls are a few years younger, and they, in the same white shirts and green aprons, watered at her in surprise, as if finding no answer. How could one not know French at such an honorable age of 12? The private lesson in a separate room wasn't so bad, but riding in the indoor stadium turned into another challenge. especially when one of the older girls let her horse gallop. And if it weren't for her gymnastic skills, Camille would have been out of the saddle long ago. Finally, the tower struck 4. Camille had found the dance hall. It seemed to her that the ballet room of the theater where she had spent so much time was not as luxurious as this schoolroom. Camille could barely keep up with the teacher. Her body, accustomed to the strict rules of ballet and aerial gymnastics, was completely confused when she had to do a new and incomprehensible movement. It felt numb, and her head stopped memorizing the combinations, intentionally or accidentally. But Mrs. Vanessa entered the hall. As always, gorgeous, with a fake dress under her throat and black gloves up to her elbows. The class had stopped. "I didn't mean to disturb you." The girl had just dropped in for a glimpse of the world-famous dancer Paul. "But I'm still not impressed with her. Do you at least dance the waltz? Or politics?" "I don't know how." Sinking my eyes. Camille, realizing she stumped herself. "You can't. So why did Stephen take you to school for dancing? Why don't you go and ask him?" "Like a hurt puppy?" Camille asked. "I'd ask him," the principal said, "but he hasn't left his room all day, citing a toothache." So Camille didn't understand. "You mean he left you to my troubles and disappeared without a word? Go on with your lessons." Mrs. Vanessa waved her hand and quickly left the room. The furious stomping of her heels rang through the hallway. The class continued, but Camille couldn't get Vanessa's words out of her head. Of course, no one but Stephen would know how she had miraculously ended up here, how she had earned it. Did everything around her suggest that she did not belong here? At dinner, Camille powerlessly picked at her plate in this crowded and noisy room. Camille felt as lonely as she had ever felt in her life. "I wish I could disappear, fall into the ground right here and now. No more Stephen headaches." She would run away home a star, shoot on the stage of a cafe while lurking in the dressing room of a prima ballerina until night listening to stories of the field, and fall asleep to her mother's lullaby. But they won't run away. She won't. She promised. And only when she was in her room, alone with the full moon peeking through her big window, the strong Camille under her new name, Paul stopped holding back her tears, pouring pink on her down pillows. Time stretched as slowly as one could imagine. Every day Camille forced herself to get out of bed, to brush her hair, which was slowly falling away from the steel but still sticking out, to put on a white blouse under her throat, an uncomfortable skirt. New languages, Emily B's, or in your head. English and French words flew in and out without lingering, and German words passed by. All the sciences were simple and easy to understand. Mathematics seemed to be Chinese literacy. Spring watered the snow little by little. Already Stephen had returned from wherever he was, and you could never tell for sure where he was telling the truth, where he was being sly, and where he was just joking. The kids, with whom Camille had most of her lessons, also shunned her, considering her a rod and not knowing elementary things. But the peers preferred to avoid the new girl altogether. That day, walking outside after school and noticing the stand of peers around the garden table, she was about to turn onto another path out of habit. But right in front of her, almost knocking her down, ran Gloria in her colorful coats with her face red with anger. The 5 Artemis sitting at the table were just drawing sketches of dresses. They were going to order them for themselves from an Odessa woman who was about to arrive. Gloria flew up to the girls, snatched the paper, and threw it right into the dirt. "What's she doing?" shouted the older Camille, Gloria's girlfriend, puffing up her cheeks. "Did he bite you? Or have you been like this since you were a kid?" "Slapped the prostitute's daughter," blurted out Gloria, beaming even more. "I didn't expect anything nice from you. But meanness. What did you say about me?" Only the truth slanted her eyelashes, Camille, making a look of innocence which made her already large, luxurious eyes seem even bigger. "I told you that you've been skipping half your classes because you think you're too smart for them. I also told her you've been seeing the stable boy, and he's been visiting us a lot. Fresh hay almost every day. He brings honey gingerbread." Camille rolled her eyes, smiling dreamily and showing everyone her straight white teeth. The girls at the table laughed. A moment later, Gloria's doll was already flying in the direction of Camille's little face. The girl turned around, placing a footstool. Gloria fell to the ground wet with snow, but managed to catch her rival's neck with her hand. Another second, and both girls were already climbing on the cold ground, bruising each other with mud and blood from the gas glove. She stood there with her mouth agape, watching the girls. Emily and Camille's other friends jumped up from their seats, but did not dare to get into the fight either. Only when Sam came out on the doorstep with a broomstick and whipped both maidens with the birch twig with a swing, did they finally part on two sides, licking their battered lips and on the first spring grass of blood. This incident made Camilla think. It used to seem to her that all these little flowering houseplants lived in their own perfect world, without pity or care, without the ghosts of the past. She was locked in her own grief, and didn't even think about the fact that each of the girls in the orphanage had their own tragedy hidden behind a brightly colored coat. So, pondering, she was going to the floor of the central tower where the chapel was located near the clockwork. It was a place she had found by accident, exploring the estate. Many times, Camille had come here, hiding from the noise. It was always empty. But this time there was a girl sitting in the middle of the temple, a complete stranger to Camille. She put her head covered with a shawl on her knees, her hand stretched out prayerfully in front of her. She was about to go backwards, but half of the wooden floor creaked, and the praying people were startled by the unexpected sound. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." She said no. "It's okay." The girl smiled back at her. "I'm Nancy, and you're Paul," said Camille embarrassedly, leaning against the wall. "I haven't seen you at school before, but you're in our uniform. You're the new girl." Nancy laughed. "Are you kidding? I'm 20 years old. I'm pretty much an old lady, just been in practice for the last few months." Squatting. "What are you standing there for?" She timidly walked over and sat down on the mat next to Nancy. "You know, I was living in London, where the poor live. They put me on a nursing course and sent me all sorts of little jobs from time to time. Real training assignments," Nancy sighed. "And I failed miserably on the last one. I guess I'm the oldest Artemis here now." "And what was that assignment you failed at?" The voices glowed with fire, and she felt hot. Had she too? Camille will take exams until she is very old and never be able to become either a real Artemis or a real agent. It's even funny to think back. I was supposed to get a job as a dancer at the local cabaret. They were hiring everyone, and they turned me down. But why? Camille shrugged. Her companion looked at her with brown eyes as clear as amber, with a fire in them. "No technique, no artistry. My judges have given their verdict. I thought they'd take me at least for my pretty face. But you see, I've lived my whole life here in the orphanage. I've learned to be the center of attention. From countess to maid, I can play the part and shoot a man without hesitation. It's proven. But when I'm on stage, the real stage, I lose control of myself in an instant. I don't know what to do. Have you talked to Stephen about this?" "Of course I have. Doesn't he realize that this kind of task isn't for you? Why can't he give you something else?" Nancy laughed, and there were attractive dimples in her cheeks. "There won't be anything else. Stephen has made it clear to me that until I overcome my stage fright, my personal demon, he won't allow me on a real mission." "That's cruel." Camille came out. "Stephen is pretty cruel in general." Nancy smiled sadly. "But maybe that's why he runs the best intelligence network in Russia. Would you like to?" Camille suddenly looked up at her new acquaintance and said, "I'll teach you not to be afraid of the stage." "Who the hell are you, Nancy?" "I'm new." The girl proudly stuck up her nose. "My name is Paul. I'm 12 years old, and I grew up in a costume box backstage at the cafe. Trust me, you're a strange girl." Paul noticed Nancy leaning back, I leaning on my elbows. "You know, Artemis love to talk about themselves, but hate to listen. And they also hate helping, because everyone wants to be first in the course. I guess that's why. I've never been here. Camille said, "You may not live, but everyone will have to get along with you." "You'll see," winked Nancy. "Well, when's the first class?" "Even now. The ballroom is empty in the evenings. We'll start with classical choreography. The basics." The shortcut to the ballroom was through the kitchen. The girls decided to bend quietly, so that the cook did not accidentally notice and did not scold. Hastily entering the hall, took off their shoes, and turned on the gramophone. The orchestra played a wounded favorite Vivaldi, well to the loom. I gave the command. The youngest and the eldest, after listening to 6, straightened up and easily put a fragile, almost transparent hand on the bar. Yes, spring was playing. Summer had begun, followed by the sound of fall. Pulling Nancy's toe one last time and wrapping her heel painfully inside, Camille gave a new command. "Now we're going to improvise." With a nod, the girl pointed to the center of the hall. "I'm not sure I can do this. How about you show me and I'll do it again?" "No, dear Nancy, that won't do. Do you hear the music? It's autumn. Imagine you've become a maple leaf, twirling, falling from the tree." Camille said. And Nancy really did think she was a fallen leaf. And even every movement was measured, deliberate, naturally. The girls were twirling in a dance they knew only to themselves, unaware that curious eyes were watching them from behind the ajar door. Nancy only noticed the fluffy sleeve of a white fox coat flickering through the crack. Little by little, the surrounding mountains were shedding their snowcaps, sheltering themselves with greenery. Birds were pouring over the rubble. They wanted to leap over the fence and run far, far away, where legend says the enchanted lake is located. She didn't count the bruises from sparring in kung fu and horseback riding. Either she was no longer able to distinguish between languages. And finally mastered the basics of belly dancing, learned polka, mazurka, waltz. A science teacher once told me about the force of inertia. Well, she lived by inertia. What are you dreaming about? Nancy came and sat next to me on a swing hidden in the back of the garden. They'd long ago fallen in love with this steamy swing and had evening gatherings here. I have good news. I'm sailing to Quebec in a week. There's a cabaret there with an underground casino that already employs one of our Artemis. If they take me on as a dancer, Stephen has promised to let me on my first real mission. I'm glad. Camille grabbed her hand, smiling. It was a sad smile, though. Next to Nancy, life at the orphanage didn't seem so bleak, and now she'll be gone too. "Have you started on the room yet? I was hoping you could help me," she said cheerfully. "It's so strange to dance for yourself and forget about the audience. Here, we've always been taught to live for show, to attract attention. It's so strange not to be real. And no, swaying over the ocean in your head. It all depends on the point of view. Here's the sky, for example." Nancy pointed to the pink glow. "It's blue, isn't it? Why does it pretend to be beaver, yellow, regimental in the evening, and then become black and wane stars at night? From a physics standpoint, the sky has no color. Nothing is color at all. It's just the wavelengths of light waves that change. It's only in our eyes. That's what I'm talking about. It all depends on the angle of view. Anyway, I got something here. Do you know tarot cards?" "No," I shook my head no. V. Golenishev. The tall boot. Nancy had a secret pocket. There she usually kept a small but sharply sharpened knife. "You never know what a plotting knife will come in handy for," she used to say. Now a miniature deck of cards sat next door to the knife. "These are unusual playing cards. They can tell fortunes," Nancy whispered ominously. "Maybe you'd rather be a fortune teller and get a job in a cabaret. Think about it. You'd have no shortage of customers. Shadows and beauty," Nancy whispered without changing her tone. "Wow, here come the lucky whistlers." Nancy, based on the fortune teller's role, is the ancient Roman goddess of luck. Fortune. She is fickle and may not always turn her back on a poor man, but may stomp the emperor himself into the mud. She doesn't care who stands before her. She is blind. And today, my dear, fortune has returned to you. What's that supposed to mean? Murmured this hourly nose. I'm going to win the estate cards and go to live by the sea. It means you'll have your chance not to miss it. Changed to a whisper again. Spun the card in his hands. Camille only shrugged her shoulders. She wanted to call her friend inside already, but she saw something scary. One of the towers of their stately home and disappeared like a Christmas firework. The map fell out of her hand. What happened? Nancy exclaimed anxiously, but Camille was already running into the yard, gazing into the fire. It seemed to her that the towers to the left of her favorite watchtower were engulfed in flames. Was someone there? The maids were already running out of the house. The old key apprentice was running for the fire hose, the stableman and fiddling at the water stand, unscrewing fuses. I'm here. Save me, I'm here. Barely audible. And the voice came from the top of the tower, whose wooden floors threatened to collapse. Mademoiselle Vanessa ran out into the street in the very robe over her underwear. Her house was burning. Her school was burning. A school designed from children's drawings of the very first Artemis, with 3 tall guardhouses and wooden galleries and balconies. But the terrible thing was different in the flaming tower that housed the library. Screamed her tutor. I can't get down. There's fire everywhere, she exclaimed. Help, help. It's Zoya, one of the 7-year-olds. In horror, whispered someone behind Vanessa's back. The housekeeper, Wendy, pressed the panic button, and the girls ran outside in droves, jumping into their shoes and wrapping themselves in diapers. Only one whispered inside, pushing her way through the crowd. Stop. Where are you going? Vanessa shouted after the green shadow, but it was already tapping its heels on the stairs of the central clock tower. And Nina, drive the crazy one away, ordered one of the older girls, the director, watching the ladder being pulled out of her waistband, examining the hydraulic arm. It seemed to her, a former Artemis agent, that it was all being done very slowly and very carelessly. She was just about ready to run into the burning tower herself when the very same shadow appeared from the window of the center guard just in front of the dial. Oh God! Vanessa clutched her head, noticing Strision of Artemis. She had heard her shouted at more than once, "Ah well terre, Bibican." She cast a glance back at Mrs. Vanessa, then at the tower engulfed in flames, and without hesitation went on the ledge, leaping swiftly to the wooden balcony connected to the library. So what now? How did you get downstairs? Thunder would have carried you. Smoke obscured the top of the tower. I couldn't see very well. The equestrians set up a ladder to climb the steps, but Nancy was ahead of them, kicking the ball forward. She climbed up herself, holding the end of the hydraulic hose in her hand. Still, the ladder was short watteau, and there was no way to reach the top of the tower. Suddenly, from the top of the tower, tied with a rope, under the chest began to descend Zoya. She stood on the balcony and threw the rope over a metal bar. Like a lever, slowly lowered the 7-year-old down. I've got her, shouted Nancy, and without thinking long, cut the rope with a knife, taking it out of the shin of her boot. She placed the trembling Zoya on the stairs and handed her to the men below. Running down there, turning on the water. But there was no turning back the long wooden ones. The balcony was already starting to collapse. Heard them wrong. Grabbing air with their mouths, went down the rope. With all her might, Mademoiselle Vanessa shouted, "If you don't make it, I'll kill you myself." She nodded to that, tethering a stump of rope. She began to descend. Catching her breath, Artemis watched the action as suddenly the rope burst and dust flew down from the height of the 4th floor. Vanessa felt like closing her eyes. For the first time in her life, she was numb with terror. Her eyes remained open. The field fell right onto a cart of hay that had unknowingly come from under the balcony. Mrs. Vanessa looked around and saw Gloria, Camille Sr., and Mara from walking away from the cart, pretending it was God knows whose merit at all. The towers were still blazing for a long time. The fire was put out, but the library could not be saved. And though Camille did not like to read very much, she felt sorry for the beautiful library. She was lying on a bed in the hospital, dreaming of falling asleep and forgetting. But she couldn't because of the pain. Her skin was very hot, and her throat was scratchy from the smoke she had swallowed. Long-bearded, the paramedic, whom Camille for some reason before beware, turned out to be a friendly uncle with an excellent sense of humor. Fortunately, the burns are not serious. There won't even be a scar. Or would you like to keep a few to commemorate your exploits? You name it, anywhere on your cheek, on your shoulder blades. We'll make you. She was lying on a bed in the hospital, dreaming of falling asleep and forgetting. But she couldn't because of the pain. Her skin was very hot, and her throat was scratchy from the smoke she had swallowed. Long-bearded, the paramedic, whom Camille for some reason before beware, turned out to be a friendly uncle with an excellent sense of humor. Fortunately, the burns are not serious. There won't even be a scar. Or would you like to keep a few to commemorate your exploits? You name it, anywhere on your cheek, on your shoulder blades. We'll make you some nice scars. He winked, shaking the scalpel in the air. It's not funny at all. Mademoiselle Vanessa stated coldly, walking into the hospital room and giving the doctor a look that would make him never want to joke again. Leave it, Mademoiselle Vanessa, Camille retorted. He's just amusing me. He says he needs your permission to inject me with morphine. At the word morphine, the director lowered herself, but nodded approvingly. Just a small dose, just to help you sleep. Pain is hardening. Did you have a problem with morphine? Camille asked bluntly, smiling faintly. Just because you became a heroine today doesn't give you the right to ask me provocative questions, she said as if she had cut me off. The woman sits down on the edge of the bed. When Stephen comes back, he'll think of a punishment for your disobedience. The order was to leave the room, and I was hiding from the injection. Camille, how's Zoya feeling? The director nodded at the neighboring bed, on which the 7-year-old was sleeping peacefully. I had no trouble sleeping at her age either, Camille muttered, trying to burrow deeper under the covers. The paramedic laughed, and even Mistress Vanessa couldn't contain her smile. I think I'm beginning to understand why that old man drew you to us. The headmistress muttered, biting her lip. You know our Stephen is rarely wrong. Mademoiselle Vanessa nodded approvingly. Well, get well, Artemis, she said, rising. And when you've recovered, come and see me for tea. Must discuss some changes in your program. The mother tongue is canceled. Camille whispered hopefully. No, by no means. But classical choreography is being added. Tell me, can you teach the girls the basics of ballet? If they had announced that she had become Queen of England or won a month's ticket, the girl would hardly have been more pleased. Mademoiselle Vanessa, may I kiss your hand? No's voice trembled and broke off. No sooner had Camille returned to class, still bound in several places with bandages. Forbidden to exercise for a whole month, she realized her world had turned upside down. Not 180 degrees, but at least 90 degrees. Hi, Paul. How are you feeling? While you were sick, we were studying time zones. Do you want me to explain the prime meridian in Greenwich? The younger ones were spinning around her like a net. And Wirt is a lefty and a fidgety, lefty 7-year-old. Zoya called her sister's field at all. Oh, and the teachers were suddenly showing more respect for the new girl. Only Gloria sarcastically threw during the meeting winks. How do you like morphine? Are you still using? She took no offense, after all she'd been through. That was the slightest of evils. In the dining room, she encountered a calm and poised Mara and smiled welcomingly. That day Artemis had no idea where all 4 of them would be led by an act so spontaneous, intuitive, and truly heroic. After all, they were the ones who had saved the unfortunate Camille and had managed to hitch the cart with hay just in time. The sun was setting behind the mountains. She sat on the swing, watching the workers finish their work. Her foot, the ball weaved through the grass and caught on something. I won't be crooked to say that Artemis is indifferent to love and all those romantic girls, but it's obvious that none of us consider marriage the meaning of our lives. When Artemis turns 15, She's waiting for an invitation to her first internship. It could be a fishing village or a troupe of traveling circus performers, an imperial palace in China or a skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. Practice teaches us to adjust and get used to life outside the shelter among ordinary people. Each of us must appear as a star, attracting the attention of passersby, must charm, delight, be on the radar without arousing suspicion. That's the way it's been for the last 20 years. But the world is changing. There's a strike in America. Ladies are getting behind the wheel. Women are increasingly being taken seriously, which hurts our cause. Where a few years ago a gorgeous and intelligent woman at a ball elicited nothing but applause, now she's attracting more and more curious stares. Something is wrong with her. That is why Stephen himself has noticed that in modern conditions the traditions of Artemis need to be revised. Sometimes it's better to hide and lurk, to be unremarkable and gray like me, she wrote and laid aside her quill. She glanced at the convex mirror hanging on the wall. Staring back at her was a fully grown girl of average height, tanned from power, unremarkable except for her greenish eyes, framed by their long black lashes beneath her eyebrow points. Her hair grew terribly slowly and barely reached her shoulder blades. She twisted them and ordered them with a Chinese bobby pin. It turned out so-so, nothing special. Well, no wonder she wasn't getting taken anywhere, either for practice or a real mission. Less than a year away from her 18th birthday, and she never left the orphanage during her stay, had visited the village nearby and sneaked out a few times to the adjacent mountain peaks. Outside the window, the horses were roaring. The girl jumped up on the bed, opened the window, and sticking her head out, saw Camille. She was riding in the river, hiding under her hat. Everyone was sure that she would never return to the orphanage. She'd gone to her first internship when she was barely 14. She was never heard from again for 2 years. Artemis already thought she had passed all the exams and was now on a mission. But they were wrong. Camille, who was almost prayed for by the teachers, adored by Mrs. Vanessa, and even Stephen himself, failed in the exam silently, without greeting the crowd surrounding her, got off the river and was ready to go into the house as Gloria appeared on the threshold. A star shone again in our humble sky. She smiled broadly. "Congratulations. Welcome back. I heard you failed too." Camille cut her off. If one could kill with a look, Gloria would be lying breathless by now. "They say you've been placed as governess to a nice French family, and you inadvertently flattered their eldest son. It really was an accident." Gloria made an angelic face. "Young men are so unrestrained these days. What did you fall asleep on? Watch your nose, and don't shove it where you don't want it." Camille tossed Igor's shoulder, going inside. She sat down on the bed and sighed. If even these girls who were gifted at everything failed, then what to speak of her? The girl walked over to the toilets and table and pulled out a drawer. From there she pulled out 3 shiny medals. She'd gotten one for saving Zoe, one for her work, and one last year for staging a ballet. There was also an old green cartouche lying there as a reminder of the world from which Artemis Paul had come here. There was a knock at the door, and a moment later Zoya was lying unceremoniously on the bed, sweeping at the air with her feet and barely containing her delight. "Did you hear that Camille is back?" she began hotly. "Mum. Only," I said. "No, put the medals back in the drawer discreetly. Why, is Mistress giving us an astronomy quiz at the end of the week?" "Yeah, I know." The girl brushed it off, not in the mood to talk about her studies. Camille rolled her classmates' eyes, the former 7th grader really clinging to her as if she were her own. "And that Stephen is coming for a month and taking some of the older girls to Russia. You know about that too." This time, Ananidze moaned as if pondering. "I think he'll definitely pick you." "You understand," shrugged Camille. "Let her do whatever she wants. No matter how long I sit over my books, I can never be like you. Look, sometimes I think you just don't know how to be happy about small victories, quirky Zoe, or joy in general. If I go on a mission," Camille finally smiled, "I'll bring you back some goodies. If you go on the mission, Slowly Hare replied in an unexpectedly serious tone. Zoya, then you will pass the exam and never come back here again. The main hall of the palace was flooded with electric light. A festively dressed Artemis was waiting for the appearance of Stephen and Mademoiselle Vanessa to begin at last the gala dinner on the occasion of the latter's birthday. And when Stephen, on the arm of the director, finally entered the Artemis Hall, the prizes rose from their seats, greeting the birthday girl, clad in a lush and bright red dress. "My dear Artemis," began Stephen affectionately, gesturing for everyone to be seated. He had aged even more in recent years, beaming with grief, but he had not lost the milky gleam in his eyes. "Today we are honoring our oldest Artemis," cautiously clarified the chief guardian, "but by experience. But before we start celebrating, I would like to please Mademoiselle Vanessa with a gift. This gift is my experiment, the first Artemis Orphanage spy team mission." The girls whispered, "That's right. Before, each of you would get an individual mission, and after passing all the practical exams, you would become a loner. Knowing that you all wanted to escape from the orphanage as soon as possible and start your adult life. This time, it's the likes of Artemis that will get the chance." Stephen paused and the girls held their breath. "The person who is best with cars and cameras, picks up a rifle in seconds, and runs the 100-meter dash the fastest. Emily," the girls exclaimed. The hall applauded loudly, and the girl only smiled modestly in response, fixing her enviable brown hair, a face that, despite her small stature, would not be afraid to face 2 or even 3 clean-cut men in hand-to-hand combat. It would be hard to name a science with which this young lady was unfamiliar. The best orators are silenced when this girl talks politics and civil rights. "Camille," voices shouted. Emily hugged her friend in joy, and she cast a barely perceptible triumphant glance at Gloria. A person born with a revolver in his hands is capable in mathematics and chess, so deftly calculates winning combinations in gambling. The hall laughed. Now everyone was already looking at Gloria with envy and hidden delight, all except Camille Sr., in the depths of whose eyes trembled indignation and real terror. "I'm not going with her." She jumped up from her seat, and everyone turned their heads to her at once. "Sit down." Stephen's voice hammered Camille back into her chair. "No one gave you the right to vote. You even failed the elementary exam," he went on, steady and calm. "And the last member of the group, the face that managed to unite, instead of disuniting the face on which I pin a lot of hopes, does not burn in the fire and is not afraid of heights. Paul," shouted Camille classmates, clapping her joyfully on the shoulders. "She herself is sitting at the table, and Jevania is dead. She's on her way to fulfill the mission." "Paul." "Really?" Gloria Ioana exclaimed with one voice. "Yeah, newsflash. Girls," Emily couldn't take it. "Taking on the responsibilities of a senior, take this as just another adventure." All 4 looked around warily, pointedly. "My dear birds," Stephen addressed them, "already tomorrow, I'll ask you to pack your bags and prepare for the whirlpool. Until then, are you celebrating? Our cooks have done a great job today. Artemis, you took up knives and forks, poured cherry kissel, the gramophone played Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and Mademoiselle Vanessa laughed her beautiful chesty laugh, answering Sam's joke. Only the 4 girls couldn't swallow a bite of the roast. The adventure they were looking forward to, dreading and fantasizing about, would begin tomorrow. It was this adventure that brought them to that ill-fated cafe in the dressmaker's shop. She met her mother, and there was no end to her happiness. After the punishment, it turned out that she did not fail in her mission, and cunningly beat off her friends in advance, let down one foreigner. Everything happened rapidly. To the task she approached quite ingeniously. She threw out to sit until morning with the child prima ballerina of her old acquaintance, and late at night sat at the bar, where she walked neat to her object. He was suspected of espionage, and it was necessary to search his apartment so as not to leave any trace. The foreigner went out for a smoke and saw a woman in tears sitting on a bench in the distance. A baby was crying frantically. "Young lady, It's not right to make a mistake here. You should go home. My husband had too much to drink and attacked me. I barely escaped. There's nowhere to go." She sobbed fake, but quite naturally. "Here you go. It's not far." The foreigner held out a bunch of keys and dictated his address. "You go ahead. I'm not going home tonight. I had a little rendezvous with a lady, and in the morning we'll go and see your husband." She had no trouble getting home. It only took her 300 hours to find the stash. She took the files with her and left the apartment door unlocked. Mission accomplished. The agent came back, barely crossed the threshold, couldn't believe his eyes. The rug on the floor had been moved. He had been so careless in his drunken stupor, trusting a woman with a baby. How could he have stumbled like that? Frantically, he peeled at the carpet. The man checked the stash. It was empty. Taking a deep breath, the spy pulled a vial from behind his sinus and drank it in a gulp. Business and life were over for him. The rest of Artemis had already disgraced. The brilliant maiden prodigies had to return to the orphanage. They had failed their exam, but the case united them. They no longer quarreled. A stellar farewell took place in the evening. The girls knew that the same Paul would be at the ball, the handsome man who had lived for years in the imagination of the now beautiful Camille. Gloria whispered angrily in her friend's ear, "So unfair. We've all fought the ghosts of our past to the end, and you're staying for the last day. I've accomplished the mission." "That's not where the mission is." Gloria pointed to the door where Stephen was drinking tea in the next room. "Is she here?" The blonde put her hand to her heart. "No matter how fast you run away from her, you still can't escape." "I know." Gloria opened the closet, took out from there a green dress, worthy of a Roman goddess, pearls, and a good hat. "Where did you get it all?" Camille was surprised. Working in a brothel has its perks. "So what kind of lipstick should you wear with that dress?" The girls arrived early. Jenna Kijewski and Nina's mom was already waiting for her daughter, happily shaking hands with the others. Artemis. And then a young man appeared at the entrance, dressed in a simple light-colored shirt and a summer jacket. Silver cufflinks gleamed on his sleeves, and his shoes were clean to a shine. Even under the shadow of his hat, Camille could recognize his face, make out the familiar thin features of his chin and nose, his achingly familiar silhouette. Gloria elbowed Camille. It hurt. "Would you like to come over and say hello?" She only shook her head negatively. "If you dislike this officer so much, can I have him for myself?" It wasn't told. He even came to the hotel. What's it gonna be, a black eye or different hair? No, but Officer Paul has already raised his head to the stands and, smiling affably, waved to the girls. "Madam, your daughter is such a psycho." Turned to her mother, Gloria. "Can you imagine? She's afraid to confess to the guy she's in love with. I think it's her low self-esteem." She exhaled sharply from his painting like a balloon. It seemed to her that if she didn't, she would burst with anger or outright scratch Gloria's eyes out. But after all, her truth. Gloria was right. Handing her umbrella to her mother, Camille picked up the hem of her long dress and walked quickly down the stairs. Gendarmerie officer Paul stood like that at the entrance to the sports complex, watching with misty eyes as a short-haired young lady in gloves and a high-heeled hat came down to him. He had 1,000 confirmations. Her mother was standing at the podium, but the staff captain still couldn't believe it was really her. "I came to thank you for your help." "You're beautiful," he said, and grabbed Camille's hand. After another moment, he was already running down the street and dragging the girl with him. "Hey, let me go," Camille begged. Confronted the officer. "You have no right." "Is that so? What are you? What right do you have to disappear and reappear in my life?" His eyes and disappeared. Tears glistened in the military man's eyes. "I missed you so much. I loved you so much. Don't ask me anything. A girl came in. I won't be able to answer you. And tomorrow I disappear again. So there's no point. Give me an answer to just one question. Why did you really come down to see me?" "Because I love you." It wasn't the sunlight that touched the ice. It was the look in his yellowish walnut eyes. And there wasn't really any ice, only the fear of letting her so close to him again and saying goodbye forever again. Subscribe and click the bell. Adriana and her sister were relaxing by the pool, while her parents and her older brother were cooking fish for dinner. The girls loved such days, when all the family rested. After all, they were a real rarity. The fact was that the Red family owned most of the businesses in town. They also owned several posh hotels, cafes, restaurants, and shopping centers. They owned a huge amount of money. As such, they didn't need anything. Parents, their entire conscious lives were spent working long hours while the children were taken care of by babysitters under the supervision of their grandparents. Michael, the oldest child, is already a big boy. He is 29 years old, so Mom and Dad are quietly bringing him closer to someday owning this empire and dealing with big money, very big money. Betty and Ethan, his parents for the past 4 years, have been bringing their son up to speed, trying to keep him busy so he can get up to speed as quickly as possible. Michael at first was not particularly eager to go into business. All the same, his whole life was carefree, and money would appear in his bank account within minutes of him letting his parents know he needed it. But when he turned 25, his parents decided it was time for him to learn how to earn, not just spend. Michael tried to resist, saying that he did not intend to work in this life, as the money that is in the account and their family, not only enough for him and his sisters for life, but also will remain for the children. All his attempts to get things back on track were in vain. Betty and Ethan were very persistent, so at a certain point there was not a penny left in Michael's account, and no new enrollment was coming in. He demanded that his parents give him back his full support, threatened them that he would do something to himself, go into a monastery. But Betty and Ethan were adamant. Mama and Papa told him that from now on he would receive money only as wages. But, as we know about the earlier banning of pants and hanging out at the club, employers do not intend to pay their employees. For 2 days, Michael did not leave his room, organized a boycott to his parents, but nothing helped. After that time, he left his room in the morning and went to his father's office and said he was ready to start his duties. Betty and Ethan were pleased that their son had made this decision. Sometimes they wondered if nothing could influence him, and if it would really be easier for him to go into a convent than to start making money. At first, Michael was entrusted with some minor tasks: sorting mail, confirming the date and time of a meeting with partners, sending faxes, and checking emails. Yes, you could say that initially he was a substitute secretary for his parents. However, they, in turn, felt that Michael should start at the bottom so that in case of force majeure, he could handle all the tasks. After all, when his parents started a business together, without a smart assistant, Michael was reluctant to do business. He did not like that his future depended on his parents. Very often he dreamed that he would develop his own business, not inherit his parents. But there was no choice. In parallel with his work, his father told him about the qualities that labor would be able to develop in him. Michael weakly believed in this, but over time he came to terms with his fate, so he began to take things more seriously. He had to abandon partying, as fatigue knocked him off his feet. Trips to the club were rare and only on weekends. Over time, he noticed that more and more girls were paying attention to him. Michael has never been deprived of female attention due to his financial status. However, even the majors have relationship failures. The small number of girls who were the most dainty for him did not pay attention to him as they had more inflated requirements for men, and they were not interested in one-night stands. However, after Michael started working, everything changed. In secular hangouts, a rumor spread that the young man began to deal with the affairs of the family business. The heir of Berea began to remarkable to himself the views of girls who were previously unavailable to him. It's very hard. His ego, although he knew that the fault is not his inner world, but money. Michael became more serious. Over the years, no one dared to make a cheap, ill-considered joke in his direction. Everyone treated him with respect, and only Adriana and Kathy knew what the young man was really like. With his family around, he was revealing himself to outsiders in new ways. He was softer, funnier. With his sisters, he liked to get mad and tease, and Kathy adored. He was always waiting for the next weekend with his family, so that work took a back seat. However, that rarely happened. Even now, when they are on vacation as a family, Michael and his parents are standing by the grill and discussing another supply problem. But one thing the girls knew for sure: as soon as they sat down at the table, all this work fuss would fade into the background. And so it was this time. As soon as the meat was ready and the mother put it on a beautiful dish, everyone sat down at a large table on the terrace adjacent to the house. During the meal, the family shared memories and news that were not related to work moments. Michael was the only one who sat in the darker shadows, not letting go of his cell phone. Betty and Ethan had already reprimanded him several times, but the young man didn't react to them at all. There was nothing the parents could do, for their son was no longer the little boy who could be deprived of pocket money or put in a corner. For half an hour, Michael diligently typed messages and then scrutinized the reply from the interlocutor, which came to his phone. When the dialogue ended, the young man muted the phone and put the gadget in his pants pocket. In an instant, Michael went from snob to funnyman. He began poking fun at his sisters. Sometimes his jokes would go so far that he would get a smack from his father. However, everyone knew that Michael was not saying all of this with malice. He loved his sisters very much and never let them hurt anyone, not even himself. Kathy was the middle child in the family. For the past few years, she had been very jealous of Michael's independence. She too wanted to start running the family business as soon as possible. The girl recently turned 22 years old. She is very ambitious and realized one thing: so that her parents would trust her to participate in building the family empire, she must perform at the highest level in her studies. Therefore, Kathy evenings, or even days, could not leave her room, spending time for textbooks and methodicals. The syndrome of the excellent girl affected her very strongly. It was not enough that she was the best among her classmates at the university. She wanted to be better than the teachers, even though she knew that the latter were annoyed by it. The girl was not afraid of their anger, because she was on a special account among them. Of course, this she owed solely to her parents, as they sponsored large sums of money to the institute twice a year. God only knows where the money went to the needs of the educational institution or into someone's pocket. Kathy hoped that her parents and brother would allow her to be involved in family affairs before she graduated from the university. However, the family had a different opinion on the matter. Michael had come to terms with the fact that he would be the sole heir to the business in 4 years. No, it wasn't that he was greedy and didn't want to share the profits with anyone. It was just that the young man had the notion that a woman couldn't handle such serious business. He was willing to give his sisters as much money as they would need to live a poor life. But he didn't want them anywhere near the empire. Their parents were completely against the girls taking part in the family business. They believed that there was nothing better for them than to relax and be busy building their own families. Betty and Ethan realized that sooner or later their daughters would marry, and only then would they be able to participate, but only through their husbands. The men Adriana and Kathy would choose had to be intelligent and successful. Only if they were so would they be allowed into the business. Otherwise, the families of the daughters would simply receive monthly subsidies for the rest of their lives. She wasn't happy with that solution. She was a feminist by nature. She would lose her temper when someone around her questioned women's abilities or said that women should take care of the family. There was nothing demeaning about it for her. So she was always jumping out of her pants, figuratively speaking, to prove her abilities. In return, she always received praise, which was said in a condescending tone, which made her lose her temper even more. Kathy had no intention of getting married and having children in the near future. She was not interested in the young men around her. In her head, she had set herself a barrier that she would be able to jump over and start building her family only when she was allowed to do business. She often took her brother's example, or rather, what he had become over the past 4 years. But she had outdone herself in that as well. Became more cold-blooded out of nervousness. She didn't care about the feelings of those around her. Only her own emotions took priority. Because of this, her friends gradually disappeared from her life. The only ones left were those she had known since childhood, who remembered how she used to be, and those hopes that sooner or later everything would return to normal. But Kathy didn't care about those either. She didn't like the fact that most of her surroundings were too dependent on their own feelings and emotions. In her opinion, this quality in people prevented them from making the only right decision that would favorably affect their lives. Kathy sat with a serious expression at the dinner table and bragged to her parents about her successes in hopes of gaining their respect and receiving praise. Betty and Ethan listened to their daughter with smiles, but their tone was still condescending as well. Kathy stepped in even harder. This was clearly not what she had expected. Meanwhile, she sat on the chair with one leg tucked under her. The other was hovering in the air. She was genuinely happy. The girl always looked forward to such meetings. She was never capricious. When her parents or brothers started discussing any work issues during the holidays, she realized that it was very difficult to manage an entire empire. Problems or urgent matters could come up any day and at any time. Adriana just waited patiently for her loved ones to finish solving things, because she knew it was only temporary. Because of work, their vacations were rarely interrupted. As parents in most cases always found a solution to problems in the shortest possible time. And I was only 19 years old. But mentally she looked like a grown woman who had already seen life. Her parents were very fond of her. She was the most cheerful and kind child of all three. The girl studied well at the institute. Unlike Kathy, with the syndrome of excellent, did not suffer. She didn't care if she was better or not. The main thing for her was to get a good knowledge of law. She chose this specialization because she thought that every person should be legally literate in order not to get hooked by scammers, and also to know everything about their rights and responsibilities. Adriana knew that she would not work in her profession. More precisely, that she would not work at all. Unlike Kathy, the girl calmly accepted the fact that her parents and brother did not want the girls to take part in the business. She realized that it was very difficult, and only a shark could survive there, which she was not. Adriana was a romantic girl. She dreamed of having her own family and making a home as soon as possible. She never wanted to work because she saw from her parents. How much time does that take up? Betty and Ethan spent very little time with their children, missing all the important stages of their lives. First steps and words. Going to their first grade graduation. First loves and first breakups. This was all seen only by their babysitters, who sometimes managed to videotape all the significant moments of their lives. The absence of parents in their children's lives greatly alienated them from each other. There wasn't the kind of trust that usually occurs between mom, dad, and child. Adriana remembered it all, and her heart clenched with pain every time she remembered running to the babysitter to tell her the news instead of her mom, for example. She didn't want it to be the same in her family. Adriana realized that her husband would be 100% involved in the family business and would be a rare house guest. So she decided that she would not go to work even if she was forced out. The girl wanted to live all the significant moments of her future children together with them. Therefore, she was already watching various psychological videos that told how to build good and harmonious relations in the family and how to bypass all the obstacles that will arise. According to such a description, one can decide that Adriana was a very calm and cute girl. However, this was not entirely true. Since childhood, she got into all sorts of trouble and also threw herself into a fight with boys. If they managed to say something offensive to her, bumps and bruises followed her throughout her life. Parents were constantly grabbing their heads, tried to hold conversations with the girl, which are able to enlighten her. However, everything was in vain. There was not a single day until she was 14 years old, so that they did not fall into another situation. The daughter's behavior stressed Betty and Ethan, So they tried several times to hire an etiquette teacher who told her how a girl Adriana should behave. Such lectures only served to amuse her, since she believed that everyone has the right to behave as they wish, as long as it didn't break the law. Most of all, Adriana resented that her parents were not happy with the way she ate. But they found something to get at, didn't they? You have to eat in a way that tastes good, Adriana thought. It doesn't matter whether the greasy sauce runs down your hands or not, whether the baked goods, the people or not. Of course, at receptions she behaved quite differently, because she was not a stupid girl and did not want to make herself look bad. But at home one could eat as one wished. She had always been told that no man would want to live with such a woman. But she disagreed. Adriana dreamed how soon she would meet her love, and they would sit together on the homestead, grill kebab, and eat it. So her arms would be up to her elbows in shish kebab and gravy. Yes, they would. And now she was sitting at the table, tucking one leg under herself, and devouring a huge fat piece of meat with great pleasure. And her entire t-shirt was dripping with its juices. Adriana caught endless stares from her relatives, who looked strong, but she didn't care at all. Adriana's friend Benjamin was due to visit that day. She had been friends with him since she was a little girl. He lived in their upscale community in the house next door. It was with him that she got into all sorts of trouble. They were friends to the extent that they were able to confide even their deepest secrets to each other. Benjamin is a little older than Adriana. In about a month from now, he will turn 23 years old. He has always loved to spend all his free time with this girl. She never gets bored. Find adventures, not Adriana, not Benjamin. There was no need for anyone else, since they complemented each other completely. If one of them was sad, the other was always looking for ways to cheer up. They could laugh together, cry together, and get punched in the neck for their mischief. Sometimes Benjamin felt as if he were experiencing something more than friendship. At such moments he thought about what would happen if the girl became his life partner. Of course, all of his fantasies were both rainbow and ethereal. There was never a bad twist in his scenarios. Fate. After such musings, Benjamin had more than once thought of suggesting that they not date. There were several times when a young man had already bought a beautiful bouquet of flowers, planned the evening. He was ready to propose to the girl to go to the next level of the relationship, but at the last moment he threw it. What he feared most in life was that he might lose Adriana forever if she did not have the same feelings for him as he did. For the past 3 years, he had always suppressed the appearance of thoughts of loving her. Benjamin wanted to keep what he already had. Betty and Ethan were not very welcoming of the friendship with Benjamin. Of course, this was due to the fact that it was with this young man that their daughter was getting into various scrapes. They blamed the young man for the fact that it is he who provokes the girl to rash actions. They did not realize that things were exactly the opposite. And since this thought did not penetrate their heads, Benjamin was to blame for everything. In addition, the young man was the son of. This family was a competitor for Red. The Flanagans were also developing their empire. In their small town, so did the Red family. They were engaged in business activities in various fields. Their cafes and hotel restaurants were second to none in quality of service. They always went toe-to-toe, constantly conflicted with each other. And then, by chance, their children became best friends. Benjamin's parents weren't thrilled with his choice of best friend either. But unlike Betty and Ethan, they never told their son who he should be friends with and who he should shun. Benjamin was very grateful for this, as he knew that Adriana did not live an easy life in a world of constant inhibitions. The girl often complained to him about her parents' cautionary speeches, even if they applied to him as well. As the family dinner was nearing its end, the Red family heard the bell ring. Adriana quickly jumped up and ran to the gate, as she knew it was Benjamin coming. Her parents and brother and sister only rolled their eyes, not understanding what she found in this young man. Betty and Ethan often thought that she might give Benjamin some of the secrets of the family business, which he, in turn, would pass on to his parents, his competitors, Just from this thought alone, they were ready to lose their temper and go to screaming to try to convince Adriana to stop being friends with Benjamin. In the meantime, and it is necessary, ran to the gate, and having opened it, threw herself on Benjamin's neck. The young man hugged her back. From the outside, they looked as if they hadn't seen each other for years, even though they had just this morning gone biking together. But thank God, Benjamin, what took you so long? You missed the whole dinner. I really wanted you to sit with us. Hello, my dear friend. I'm sorry what happened. I really tried my best to come as early as possible, but all the circumstances were such that I was free only now. The girl stood with a serious face with her hands at her sides and without taking her eyes off the young man, and she clearly didn't believe what he was saying. She understood why things had turned out the way they had. She wanted to hear it from her friend, though, and she hated being lied to or not told something. Admit it, you just didn't want to come, and you delayed it on purpose. Adriana, what are you talking about? It wasn't like that. But you know your parents aren't exactly thrilled that I'm here. I think if I sat at the same table with you, they'd feel uncomfortable at the very least. I know these family days are pretty rare for you guys, so I just didn't want to spoil it. Benjamin, I completely understand all of this. I don't care how my parents, my brother and sister feel. I want them to accept that we'll be together forever, and our friendship is unbreakable. It blows my mind that after all these years, they still can't get over it. Adriana, I mean, that's what parents are. They'll always worry about you. That's just you. My family, and I know you're not in any danger. Your family doesn't think so. They think that if our families are rivals, then someone's bound to get hurt physically or mentally. It's like we're two rival mafia clans. After these words, Adriana rolled in laughter, took Benjamin by the hand, and led him to the table. The faces of the parents were very confused, as they hoped that the young man would not dare to disturb their rest. Nevertheless, each of them realized that it was necessary to portray a cordial and welcoming manner. On the faces of the parents appeared strained smiles, and Michael and Kathy did not even raise their eyes to the guest. Hello, Benjamin. What brings you here? Betty greeted her daughter's friend. Did you come here just for fun or with some news? Yes, hello. I'm very happy to see you. Actually, they invited me over for dinner. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it in time. Oh, really? Don't you know it's not proper to be late? Of course, knowing Adriana, I warned her right away that I probably wouldn't be able to make it by the appointed time. Then she told me to come when I had the chance. I finished my business and went straight to you because I missed Adriana so much. Benjamin, but you only saw her this morning. We went biking together. My dad joined the conversation. Oh, that was when. It's been 100 years. By the way, she and I never even called or texted each other after that. Believe me, that rarely happens to us. Yeah, we noticed Adriana was off the phone too. Okay, Kathy's gonna make you some coffee and you tell us what's new. Yeah, there's not really any news. I heard Fox finally moved to our town. My parents are always freaking out about it. Fox what? Did Betty and Ethan yell? Yeah. What's the big deal? That crook wants to take away some of our business. I think that's what your parents are nervous about. He can't get enough of everything. Why would he move to our small town from out of state, only to steal from our empire? Benjamin looked at his indignant parents, and they looked at him with a kind of bewilderment. He did not realize that some fox wanted to grab a part of Red and Flanagan's business. It was the first time the young man had heard of this character. He felt that if he had been told anything about him before, he would know why his parents were so alarmed by the man's arrival, and he would also understand the reason for Adriana's parents' resentment. The young men looked at each other. Adriana took Benjamin's hand and told his parents that she was going out. This time, Betty and Ethan did not oppose it at all, as their heads were full of other things. The young people headed towards the gate and soon disappeared behind it. Ethan, do you even realize what's going on? Why are you sitting so still? Why am I sitting so still? I'm just like you. I just found out Fox is coming. You expect me to make a decision and act in 5 seconds. Okay, I'm sorry, honey, I really overreacted. The first thing we need to do is calm down. At that moment, Ethan threw Betty a look. Okay, the first thing I need to do is calm down, if it makes you feel better. Yeah, the second thing is to find out why he came here. No, that's not the question at all. Why did he move here? Look, but maybe he was just drawn to nature. Yeah, that's why he chose the second most populous city in the region. If he was drawn to nature, he'd go to the country or the woods. Honey, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking stupid thoughts in my head. I just want to stop thinking as soon as possible that he moved here to steal from us. Do you have any idea how scared I am? This is such a dangerous man. I'm scared for our children, or rather, I'm scared for our girls. Don't worry, we're not gonna hurt the girls. I think the first thing we should do is talk to Flanagan, not Foxy. We need to find out what they know about his arrival. Maybe they know the real reasons, and only after that conversation can we move forward. Ethan, how do you think we're gonna talk to them? Have you completely forgotten that we're competitors? Betty, we're competitors who could be at the bottom in a second. And at the bottom, as you realize, there are no competitors. Everyone's equal. Do you want to go to the bottom? I don't. At that moment, Ethan took his cell phone out of his pants pocket and started looking for the phone number of the head of the Flanagan family. Once he found it, the man froze for a few seconds. It was clear from the look on his face that he didn't feel like calling at all, but the circumstances were such that they had to stick together. When Ethan pressed the call button, there was silence in the room. It seemed to take forever. In fact, he got an answer after the second ring. Go ahead. There was a pleasant male voice on the other end of the line. William, good afternoon. This is Ethan Red. Don't get distracted. Hello, Ethan. Why am I introducing myself? I have your number on my cell phone. I realize we're competitors, but we're still reasonable adults. Anything can happen. Can I help you? Yeah, you're right. I'm just making a habit of introducing myself. Michael's in charge of calling partners and clients. They don't even know what I look like or talk like anymore. William, you heard Fox is here. Of course I did. How did you hear about it? Ethan realized that Benjamin had probably said too much and shouldn't turn him, and parents needed to come up with a story right away. But prolonged silence could arouse suspicion. William, but you know this is a small town. Word travels fast. That's why I called you, to clarify, since I've heard it on the gossip level. Yeah, it's true. I suggest we get together, discuss it. This is exactly the time when we need to bury the hatchet and start working together. The words of William Flanagan sang. It is true that no entrepreneur can resist a giant like Fox, even if he has already built an empire in the city. In such a case, you need to rally together and think carefully about a plan. What did you do with these two men who were competitors until recently? The meeting was set for the same day. It was agreed that women, although they have a big part in the development of the business, not to take wives and daughters could spoil everything due to their emotionality. No one opposed this decision. No one except Kathy. The girl was literally losing her temper, proving to her father and brother that they were again infringing on women's rights. She was sure that she would show herself at the negotiations only on the best side. But Ethan and Michael stood their ground. It was time to act. The men went to the house to change. They chose casual suits in a classic style. The meeting was informal, so they could do without ties. After 20 minutes, they were ready, got into the Jeep, and headed to the restaurant where the meeting was scheduled. The facility was not owned by either Red or Flanagan. It was neutral territory. Ethan's Jeep was parked at the entrance. Once inside, the man found that there was no one in the room and only two men sitting at one table. They were William and Benjamin. It turned out that Flanagan Sr. had specifically reserved the entire restaurant for 3 o'clock so that no one could interrupt or overhear their conversation. William Manor raised his hand and invited the men to their table. To be honest, Ethan was a little offended by such a gesture that this Flanagan was allowing himself. Is he calling for waiters? Forgot who was in front of him. When the rage inside was starting to boil over, Ethan took several deep breaths and slow exhalations. He needed to calm down and become less picky about the members of this family. Michael was most surprised to see Benjamin at this meeting. After all, the young man had gone for a walk with his sister only 40 minutes ago. He wondered how in that time Flanagan Jr. had managed to get home, change his clothes, and get here. He really wanted to ask that question, but he decided to restrain his curiosity. "Hello, gentlemen. It's been a long time since we've seen each other in person like this." "Yes, William, it has. How do you do? I hope you don't mind me bringing my son. He's been a big part of our business development for the last 4 years, so he has every right to know what he's up against. Of course I don't mind. You see, I'm not alone either. Benjamin has only recently started working for me, but he too must be prepared for anything. I understand that Michael, like Benjamin, has no idea. Who's Fox? No, I was hoping he wouldn't have to face him in real life, so I didn't tell them, to be honest. Michael was not very interested in the development of our businesses and establishments at first. At that moment, I tried to give him only positive information, but now he has matured, become more serious and wise. It's time to realize that the reality is not as smooth as we'd like it to be. You're right. Shall we begin?" After these words, William Flanagan began to tell everything he knew about Fox. Earlier, there had been rumors going around town that he was moving in with them. The women were ecstatic, because he was a single man and overly wealthy. The men, on the other hand, had their tails between their legs. William had to believe in the truth of these rumors only yesterday, when he received a call on his phone from Noah Fox himself. He couldn't believe it. The last time they had talked was at least 7 years ago, when Noah had set his eyes on his transportation company and tried to squeeze it out by all means. It should be noted that Noah had always acted legally, well, or near legally. No criminality. At that point, William was grabbing all the connections he could at the time. They almost succeeded in proving that Fox was going to take something that didn't belong to him. However, police officers and lawyers were afraid of Noah, and no one risked pressing charges against him. These rumors reached the regional city. At some point, the regional prosecutor called Noah and told him what was in store for him if he did not calm down. The men were longtime friends, so Fox decided to listen and settle down. This time when he called William, he didn't go around, yes about. The man got straight to the point. Noah said he'd gotten crowded in the regional town, wanted to move to a place where life was so vibrant and people didn't know him. "Fool, why are you making up stories? How can people not know you when your face is on TV all day long?" Thought to himself, Flanagan Sr. Fox informed William that he was going to expand his business and casually mentioned that he was very interested in the Flanagan and Red properties. At this point, William realized that he was in the biggest trouble he had ever been in. Noah never just said anything. If he said he liked those objects, it meant that he would do anything to get them. This is 100% information. Even if you are a single mother with 5 young children on your hands, and this business allows you to live a normal life, and is your only income, he will still take it away. You see, Noah Fox has never been known for kindness, humanity, or mercy. This man doesn't have his heart where it should be. Stands a bill, a successor. If his account balance has increased, he'll be a little softer than a rock. So you won't be in any pain at all. Deal with him. The expression on Ethan's face changed. The man clearly realized that things were much worse than originally thought. Flanagan and Red began to discuss a possible solution to this unpleasant matter. It was no small matter. The issue was not unpleasant, but catastrophic. If what Fox hoped would happen happened, the two families would lose tens of $1 billion of their monthly income. At some point, the men's quiet conversation turned into an argument in raised tones. The waiters became uncomfortable and fled to the back rooms. Only the security guard remained in the hall, who was already on guard, as he was convinced that a fight was about to break out. The doors to the restaurant swung open. William Flanagan was about to cause a scandal, as he had specifically rented all the establishments so that no one could interrupt them. When he looked up, he saw a familiar silhouette, his mouth dry and his throat tight. He couldn't believe his eyes. Noah Fox was entering the restaurant, followed by a young man whose face he couldn't make out because the bright evening sun was scattering its rays behind him. As the man came closer, William and Ethan realized that behind Noah's back was Jacob, his son. The young man was a complete carbon copy of his father. His long, pointed nose and chin made his appearance speak, the way a trickster looks, which he is, eyes bright blue. The people around him sometimes felt as if they were afraid of the candlelight, because no one had ever seen Radu like him before in their lives. Jacob was dressed in a stylish suit, gray color white shirt, and around his neck was a red tie. His face was haughty. Jacob knew that now his father was eating up these small business shirts that had managed to establish themselves quite well in this small town. So all gathered together in such pleasant company, and we haven't been honored to be with you. Noah Fox started the conversation. A mocking smile appeared on his face. Well, it's not right. It's indecent. They are all newcomers to your city, you might say your colleagues. And you ignore us so coldly. You haven't been taught any etiquette at all. Noah, hello, replied Alec Flanagan. We were just sitting around deciding where to invite you. We wanted to gather with families. As you can see, we have no wives and daughters with us. There's no way we'd ignore you coming or moving. We did, didn't we? Have we become uncomfortable in the region? Noise and noise. People don't let us take a step. We decided to change the situation a little and settle down in the entrepreneurial plan in the new city. Ethan, how is your hotel business doing? Noah, not much. You know what I mean. It's not a resort town. No big influx of tourists. The hotels make a steady, small profit. Really? Well, I think you're cheating me out of my money. Oh, it's not nice of Ethan to cheat on his friends. Jacob and I are here for you wholeheartedly. I heard that your hotels are not really in demand among foreign tourists, and rooms must be booked at least 2 months in advance. So your profit margin is just what I need. What do you mean? There was a lump in Ethan's throat that prevented him from asking the question in a confident tone. His voice was a little muffled. I want your hotel business. I think we'll make a deal. Noah, I don't think I can sell it to you. I'm not the only one in the business. Michael and Betty are too. These things don't just happen overnight. Basically, we need to get a family council together. I never said I wanted to buy it from you. You see, I need to get a foothold in your town, and I don't want to start a business from scratch. Have you forgotten, Ethan, that Ethan didn't know what Fox was talking about? What's he supposed to remember? Forget how 20 years ago your business was on the verge of bankruptcy, and I loaned you a large sum of money. How could you do that? You said you'd remember it forever. It hasn't been that long. Wait a minute, Noah. I do remember everything. What you don't remember is that after 6 months, I paid it all back. You're right, you got every penny back, but no more. Is that how it works in big business? No, Ethan, that's what the 6 months were about. And you never thought to pay it back. That's 20 years worth of interest. You never said anything about interest. At the time, you said you were giving me the money with no strings attached. Isn't that right? Because interest is so commonplace that no one ever mentions it. Because that's the way it's supposed to be. Wow. So I didn't pay you interest, and you waited 20 years to take it. I'm in the hotel business. Are you out of your mind? Ethan was starting to lose his temper. He realized that Fox's arrival would cause problems for his family, but he couldn't have guessed that the problems would be of such a huge scale. The man was holding himself together with the last of his strength, so as not to lose his brand and trample his reputation by his own efforts. William Flanagan at this time sat relaxed. Since Noah Fox had not yet said anything to him, He hoped that the fate of being robbed would pass him by. However, as soon as a faint smile appeared on his face, Noah turned to him. "William, you have a very good cafe chain from the circus. So many delicious dishes. I read your tax returns and marveled at how such a small business can make such an impressive profit." "That's impressive." At that moment, William tried to replay in his head the memories when he had borrowed money from Fox, or when the latter had done him any favor that could have a big impact on his life. But he remembered nothing. As it happened, William and Noah were only fighting and competing, nothing more. William did not cross him, as that would only make things worse. A nervous smile appeared on his face. "What are you trying to remember that you owe me?" "You owe me your good attitude," Noah said, smiling. "But you and I also have a warm, friendly relationship. So let's show and tell everyone. I will gladly accept this modest gift from you and your family." "Noah, are you trying to leave us all pantsless?" William suddenly shrieked. "But why no pants? You have a lot of businesses, and I think that for the years of our friendship I can get you such a small gift from Ethan." The men stood in utter bewilderment. It could not have occurred to anyone that Fox's wishes would be measured on such an enormous scale. William and Ethan had thought that he would simply be bilking them out of large sums of money. But what was he going to take away? What have they spent their lives developing? Half their lives. No one could have guessed. Benjamin and Michael stood silent. Flanagan Jr. did not dare to open his mouth because he was very green in business and did not know how to solve the problems that Fox had brought down on their heads. The young man decided to adopt this silent tactic and not interfere with his father's decision that could change their way of life. Of course, if William had given away his cafe chain, their family would not have become destitute overnight. They'd still be rich. It was just that the income would be a little less. Michael, meanwhile, was also silent, but not because he was afraid of ruining everything, but because he was trying to understand what Fox needed from them. The young man guessed that it wouldn't be long before Noah made a suggestion. If Flanagan and Red agreed to it, everyone's empires would be intact. But the stakes were too high, which meant that the offer was not going to be the most palatable. But looking at Jacob Fox, he realized that he too was somehow involved in this. There were 1,000,000 thoughts in his head, but inside was the firm conviction that none of them were true. "Don't say anything." Guys interrupted the silence. "Fox Sr. afraid to hear what else you have to offer us," replied Ethan. "Suggestion. The only option I can think of is to leave your empires in this city." "Interesting to hear." "Scary interesting," William replied, emphasizing the first word. They were all really scared, for the stakes were high. "Well, your problems are solved with just one good decision. You see, Ethan." Noah turned to the head of the Red family. "Your daughter happens to be popular with the opposite sex. I don't know what it is about her, but she's certainly got a lot of energy. You wouldn't believe it. My son couldn't resist her at that moment." Jacob had a satisfied smile on his face. "It happens, Noah. Who better than you to say the heart can't do what the heart says? How many times has he changed his own? It happens, but I always got what I wanted. And my son should learn that from me. Get what you want, no matter what. Now, Jacob wants your daughter. Ethan, what can I do to help?" They'd probably go to the same parties. "All Jacob has to do is walk up and strike up a conversation," Ethan replied. He didn't want his daughter to get involved with the Fox family. "But you can't talk like that in their presence." "I approached her, but she didn't talk to me very enthusiastically," Jacob interjected. "I don't intend to dance around her either, you know, Fox, and you don't do that. I just need her." "Ethan, don't you have any idea where we're going with this?" Peter asked. "Frankly speaking, I don't understand what you want and why you came here, threatening to take away our businesses. Your daughter is to be my son's wife. Don't worry. He won't touch her until she's married. He'll be fine for a week." What did Michael shout? What wife? What week? Can't my daughter choose her own husband as a regular legal wife? Why are you looking at me like that? Your eyes will fall out of your orbits and you won't be able to pick them up and milk off your own milk. He's a little excited at the news his sister's marrying such a prominent bachelor. Noah, how can I promise they'll get married if Adriana has to make that decision herself? She's a woman. The decisions she has to make are what dress to wear and what lipstick to wear. For everything else, she has to rely on the opinion of the older men in her family. This conversation is starting to bore me. You have 2 o'clock to give me an answer. Otherwise, you will lose your children. Noah, I'm sorry. William got involved in the conversation. How does Ethan's decision affect my business? The thing is, Alessia, Adriana is not a distraction from your Benjamin. If she marries Jacob, your son must hide in the gloom and not come closer to her than 100 meters. Yeah, we're all good with that. Fox Sr. in the Medi is revived. No, Betty, you don't want to ask me. Started shouting Benjamin. Comrades from Fox, how do you think I should give up the man I've known all my conscious life? There's nothing between us, so why am I a threat to you? And let me ask you, what century are we living in? What kind of primitive society is this? Not a living human being with feelings and emotions. So why should she do something that's against her will? Because she's a woman, she's not naturally capable of making good decisions. I don't understand. You don't like it. You want to perform. Be careful, because the consequences of your stubbornness are what I outlined earlier. At this point, William pulled Benjamin back, showing that he'd better shut his mouth and accept Fox's terms of play. Noah, don't worry, don't mind my son. He's still young. Despite his age, the blood in his veins is boiling. I subdued him. He'll be quieter than the grass. Look, William, on your own responsibility. I don't really want to mess with spit and get my hands dirty, so to speak, Noah said in a stern tone. Ethan, I expect an answer from you tonight. If it doesn't come, we'll have to share. My friends, Noah and Jacob at the same moment turned around and walked towards the exit. The remaining men in the room sat there looking lost, and only Benjamin's face showed a look of rage and aggression. A flame was raging inside him. It was as if a volcano was preparing to erupt. He didn't understand why his father was so afraid of Fox that he was ready to close his son's mouth. Was there no control over this man? Apparently there wasn't. He had heard that in recent years, all high-ranking officials had resigned, and Fox's relatives and close friends had taken their places. Against such a man, no one could dare to go against him. Be it a policeman, a tax inspector, or even a prosecutor. No matter how hard Benjamin strained his meanderings, he could not quickly come up with a plan to save Adriana. He couldn't imagine his life without her. After all, his feelings for this girl were more than just friendship. Deep down, the young man dreamed that he and Adriana would be together. And if his parents could accept his choice, Betty and Ethan would do anything to prevent it. They didn't care how their daughter would feel. They needed to satisfy their own ambitions. As it was now, Benjamin was 100%. I'm sure Ethan would accept Fox's offer without hesitation, just to avoid losing a piece of the business. In doing so, the Flanagan family would be intact and their wealth would remain the same. While Benjamin was thinking, he did not even notice that they had already arrived home. A worried mother stood on the doorstep. William silently approached her, took her by the hand, and led her to his study. The young man did not follow them. He did not want to be present at this conversation. He entertained the hope that Adriana's parents would not agree to this scam. It was impossible. How could you sell out a human being for your material needs? Ethan and Michael drove home in complete silence. The young man's mind was racing with thoughts. He was trying to think of a plan to keep their empire intact, but not to keep his sister's independence. Ethan was morally ready to go along with Fox's terms. He was just working out a speech in his head that would convince his women that it was the only way out of this situation. Adriana, Kathy, and Betty were in the yard. Mom was bathing the flower beds, tidying them up. Kathy was doing yoga rather than reading a book. The women didn't immediately notice that their men had only returned when Ethan and Otke wandered in. They took their eyes off their own business and made their way toward the men. None of them said a word. Everyone was scared. Adriana wasn't scared. She just didn't want to look too frivolous in front of the others. So she adopted the tactics of her mother and older sister. I'll tell you right away, Ethan started talking. Things aren't going too well. Fox came to our town with only one goal, and if he doesn't achieve it, we'll lose our hotel business. And the Flanagan family is in a chain of coffee shops. The stakes are pretty high, so Noah's demands are very serious. What? But how come, Ethan? There's got to be some kind of control over him. It's impossible that this man's life is rife with permissiveness. Betty's worried. I've made up my mind. We're not accepting any of his demands. We go straight to the prosecutor's office. No to the regional prosecutor's office. Betty, calm down. Nothing will really help here. What prosecutor's office? Have you forgotten who he is? The regional prosecutor. Do you want us to lose our pants altogether? Dad, what condition did Fox set you? Asked Kathy with a clever look, who took the whole conversation as a business proposal from which everyone should benefit. It's the hardest thing to panic, Ethan said in a low voice, shifting his eyes to Adriana. The girl's heart clenched. Never in her life had her father looked at her with such sadness. Well, I'll tell you right away that what I'm about to say is not up for discussion. The decision has been made. Adriana, why didn't you ever tell me that Jacob was paying you any attention? If I knew who it was, maybe I would have. Who is he? And what does that have to do with him? Jacob, Noah Fox's son. Turns out he's been in love with you for a long time. He's tried to get your attention a few times, but you've been soft on him the whole time. You see, he's got such a deep crush on you that the young man can't think of anything else but you. Okay, that's certainly nice, but if he didn't respond to me, he wasn't attracted to me. What does this have to do with you meeting New and Foxy today? Directly. Now I'll tell you about Fox's offer and my decision. Ethan hesitated. It hurt him to say those words. In a week's time, you will marry Jacob. And tomorrow night is the engagement party. Period. What a chorus of screams. Betty, Adriana, and Kathy. That's it. No arguments. We've never brought you into the family business, but now you can do a huge favor to keep our wealth intact. Don't worry, you're gonna be rolling in the dough. You know how much money Fox makes, right? Are you kidding me? Dad, tell me you're kidding, and it's just a prank. Daddy's getting hysterical. Adriana, you're willing to get rid of one member of your family just to make more money. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Michael intervened. Calm down, I said, Adriana. What's so terrible about you getting married now? I don't understand your outrage. Jacob, good looking, not ugly. Even I'd say he's a handsome young man with a great deal of wealth in his account. Are you stupid? Don't you realize that everyone would like to be in your shoes? When I meet him in clubs, I see that girls are hoarding him. And all he thinks about is you. Do you realize what a happy married life you'll have? He's gonna blow the dust off you. What do I care how many girls he's got hanging all over him? I don't care about him. Have you ever thought about me getting into bed with him? How I'd feel in that moment? Or do you not give a damn either? That's what Ethan yelled. And I said from the beginning that it's not up for discussion. And go to your room and start getting cleaned up. Mom will pick out your dress for tomorrow night. Mom, why didn't you say something? She cried out, not looking at her mother. I think I'm right about everything. He's never made a wrong decision in his life. If he said that you will be good with Jacob, then it will be so. No tears have accumulated in his eyes. The girl usually never cried, but now there was no strength to hold back. She snapped out of her seat and ran into the house. So on the fresh lawn left footprints, as if she was like wearing soccer cleats with spikes. Adriana ran as hard as she could, but she felt like a turtle. She wasn't ready to accept her father's decision. It's her life. How could anyone else control it? Only she had the right to do so. The girl realized no one would let her out of the house. She knew the secret passage. It was hidden not only from prying eyes, but also from the video cameras that were hung all over the homestead. Adriana texted Benjamin half an hour later at our cafe without waiting for a reply, ran to her room to change and pack. She assumed she would have to flee the city today, to where she herself didn't realize, taking money from her stash. She headed for the backyard. There, a month ago, the wind had ripped off a metal profile that was easy to push back and get into the neighbor's lot. She wasn't afraid of the neighbors. They knew Adriana used it periodically to escape her parents' overprotective behavior. It took no more than 20 minutes to walk to the cafe, but the girl made it in 10. Apparently, adrenaline gave her strength, and she could not move in measured steps. Entering the cafe, Adriana was surprised to notice Benjamin at the table, as if he was sitting there. When she texted him, the young man twitched his leg nervously. She realized that her friend was aware of what was going on. Why had she called him? Adriana realized that it was pointless to expect any serious help from Benjamin. She just wanted to share her emotions and tell him that she was leaving. "Benjamin, I'm so glad you were sitting up when I texted you." "No, it's just that right after you texted me, I jumped in the car and drove here. Figured I'd rather wait for you than be late." At that moment, a call came in on her cell phone. When she looked, she saw it was her father. The girl dropped it, but a few seconds later, a call came from her mother. Then she decided to disconnect the phone so that it would not bother her and fray her nerves. "Are the parents concerned about the tone?" asked Benjamin. Yes, that's how she disconnected the phone. "Benjamin, do you even know what condition Fox made to my father?" "Of course I know," guiltily replied the young man. "I was at the meeting with them. I'm horrified at how a grown man could come to that inference. I hope your father thinks it over and refuses." "No, Benjamin, he has thought it through and agreed. I don't know how he doesn't feel guilty about selling his own daughter already. He's already thought it over and decided to marry you off to that smug turkey. Yeah, I guess he had enough of the 15-minute car ride home. And my mother says we should trust my father because he's never made a decision in his life that reflects negatively on us. But I don't understand why she thinks my life of suffering would be considered a pleasure to her. By the way, Fox made some kind of condition on you too. He wanted a piece of your business too." "What was your condition?" Benjamin hesitated. He didn't feel comfortable talking about it. He didn't want Adriana to feel obliged or guilty. After all, the conditions that Flanagan had set required minimal or no action on Benjamin's part. "Adriana, our condition is that I disappear from your life and never show up again." "What? So not only do they want to marry me off, they want me to form a new neighborhood. Are they crazy? Why do you have to disappear? What's in your way? They think you and I are too close. Sooner or later, our friendship can grow into something more." "What the hell is he breathing out?" said Adriana, leaning back in her chair. "They should see a doctor. They're all sick in there." "No, it's not crazy. It's Adriana." "What do you mean?" "Oh, of course, I wasn't prepared for this conversation. Adriana, you and I have known each other all our adult lives. I've never met anyone who was better for me than you. I started to notice a long time ago that I was drawn to you as a woman, not a friend. Unexpectedly. Why am I hearing about this for the first time? I have no right to know how you feel." "Yes, you do. It's just that I was afraid you'd be afraid you'd reject me. If that happened, I wouldn't have a friend or a girlfriend. I decided I'd rather have a bird in my hand." And he did. "Look at that husband, Lana." And she didn't start yelling at the whole place. Benjamin had a look of bewilderment on his face. He did not understand why his confession caused such a reaction. "Don't you all care how I feel? On your plaything. Then I'll tell you something, and then you can live with it. My darling Benjamin, you must realize that our entire friendship was not just based on liking you as a person. I've been in love with you since I was a little girl. Yes, I didn't say that because I was taught that the first step should come from a young man. But you see, chose the tit for tat. Adriana jumped up, grabbed her backpack, and was about to run away, as long as she was not in the company of traitors. She couldn't believe that all these years her feelings for Benjamin had been mutual, but he'd turned out to be a rare coward. All that time they could spend in each other's arms and feel supported. As she turned to leave, Benjamin grabbed her left wrist. "Wait, what did you say? I can't believe it. So you're telling me that jumping Tarzan, you weren't afraid to get into a kid fight? You weren't afraid to break windows to people who pissed you off? You weren't afraid, but you were afraid to say how you felt. No, you were afraid to open up and tell me how you felt. I was just waiting for you to make the first move. It's not proper for a lady to talk about her feelings. A young man might think she's imposing, and I didn't mean it that way. It's not proper for a lady. What are you saying?" Benjamin burst out laughing. "You're a fool. You're so mature. How could you hide it your whole life? Jesus, what kind of shit have we gotten ourselves into? It's nothing like that. I'll leave now, and then you'll come back, and everything will be better than ever." "No, you can't leave. It could get worse. They could find you and do bad things. We don't want that. I thought of something while I was waiting for you here. I'll tell you all about it, and then you can go home and get ready for the engagement party. You're crazy enough to think you can run my life. What kind of traitors are around? Calm down, and you listen to me." Benjamin forcefully sat Adriana back in the chair. The young man came up with a plan to save Adriana 100%. He wasn't sure of it, but 100% sure it was better than letting things go to waste. The girl listened to him attentively, occasionally resenting him and calling him crazy. As soon as Benjamin stopped talking, Adriana thought about it and decided that this was the best plan. She hadn't heard any other, though. As soon as they agreed on everything, she was ready to resent it. But then she felt that such power from Benjamin made her body tremble. She loved it. Adriana headed home on her own so as not to draw attention to her friend, the way he could get into trouble. "Where have you been? Do you even have a conscience?" Mom started yelling from the doorstep. "Why is your phone off? How could you leave without permission before such an important event?" "Mom, you think that after such wonderful news I didn't need some time to think things over? You could have done it in your room. I thought you were in there crying. I came to comfort you, and there was no sign of you." "Okay, that's why I left, because I knew you wouldn't leave me alone. Stop yelling. I'm here. I'm ready to marry your smug turkey. What more do you want? It'd be nice if you'd change your tone to a calmer one and start acting like a Foxham family. I have to go rob someone." "Adriana, how many times? These are respectable people. I can see how respectable they are that everyone around here is tucking their tails. It's okay. I've had my say and I'm ready for my fitting. Did you get your dress ready for the party tomorrow night?" Betty nodded contentedly, took Adriana's hand and led her to her room. When they entered, the girl was speechless. Half of her room was furnished with hangers filled with dresses of different styles. Adriana was not very well versed in fashion trends, but she realized that in front of her were outfits from famous designers. Under any other circumstances, the girl would have started resisting the outfit choice, as she was not at all eager to marry Fox Jr. However, her and Benjamin's plan was precisely that she should blow dust in the eyes of the in-laws. Betty swirled around her daughter, relentlessly applying one projectile or the other to her, and she pretended as if the process gave her great pleasure. In principle, she didn't care what kind of dress she wore, and she didn't want it to be something inexpensive, since the outfit would be ruined. She just felt sorry for the money her parents would spend on her. But then the girl remembered thanks to whom she was in this trap and chose the most expensive one that was presented. Betty was a little surprised by the choice, because this dress was not at all to her daughter's taste, but it looked amazing on Adriana's figure, so her mother accepted her choice. Betty and Ethan were ready to spend a lot of money on this party, just so that their life would remain the same. However, The girl couldn't understand how life would be the same if one child was just yanked out of their family. They would pretend they never had one, or they'll entertain the thought that it's only for a couple of years, for now where Kathy is playing. And the girl's broken fate is completely out of anyone's mind. After the dress was chosen, Betty took Adriana to her dressing room where her jewelry was kept in a safe. They were exquisite handmade pieces from renowned jewelers. By selling them, the Red family could completely buy out the houses in their upscale community. Adriana had never seen all of her mother's jewelry in one place before. Her eyes went wild at the sheer variety. Emeralds, rubies, diamonds. However, the girl's eyes stopped on the amethyst, a lilac transparent stone that held something magical, according to Adriana. At least that's what the books she read said. In just a few hours, Adriana was fully prepared for tomorrow's event. Her mother was running around her with a joyful look, as if she was willingly and lovingly marrying the man she had been waiting for all her life. The girl tried with all her might to pretend, as if she had nothing against the engagement and subsequent wedding. Toward nightfall, she could no longer pretend. Tears were constantly coming to her eyes, and her mother and father could not leave her alone. When her parents finally let her go, she headed to her room, collapsed on her bed with all her might, and began to sob. Adriana tried not to make a single sound so as not to attract attention from outside. She didn't want to see anyone from her family, as it was believed that they had all betrayed her. When the tears were over, she picked up her phone to text Benjamin. The young man did not respond to her messages for a long time. Adriana began to worry. She thought he had decided to backtrack, and tomorrow's plan would fail. It was about an hour or so until the young man replied to her. Benjamin said he was near his parents the whole time and his phone was in his pocket, but silently so nothing could draw attention to it. Benjamin was sure that tomorrow everything would go smoothly. He was sure that they wouldn't ask, but would do everything as they had agreed. Benjamin's support helped Adriana to come to her senses a little, but inside her there was a real storm of emotions. Nothing helped her to calm down. Along with her worries came insomnia. The girl in the depths of her soul dreamed that today's night would fly very quickly. This ill-fated day would come, and she would have to endure only a few hours before everything would be solved. However, her body had completely different plans. Her heart refused to calm down, increasing its revolutions. Her brain was constantly churning out crazy thoughts about how tomorrow's engagement might unfold if things didn't go according to plan. Adriana tried to chase those thoughts away, breathing deeply and slowly to push the anxiety away. But it didn't help for more than 10 or 15 minutes. At some point, Adriana realized that it was already getting light outside the window. In just 3 o'clock, her mom was going to wake her up. The girl had already decided that she would not try to go to bed at all. But then she thought that she might make some mistakes in the evening because of her tiredness. Adriana put a pillow on her head to keep the light out of her eyes. She began to read a poem, barely audible in a whisper. At some point, she began to sink into the bottomless void that took her into the realm of morphine. And she did not wake up from the fact that her mother shook her and began to scream louder and louder. The girl came to as if she had passed out abruptly and opened her eyes wide, taking in a large amount of air with her mouth. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" With indignation, the girl muttered indignantly, "I can't wake you up. For 10 minutes now, I've been scared. I feel like you've been messing with me on purpose. So what I said is what you call bullying. I'm sorry, Mom, that the media has the same desires at night and in the morning as you do." Adriana sneered. "That's enough. Come on, get ready, come out for breakfast. There's a car coming to pick us up in 200 hours. "I don't get it. What car? Isn't this where we're having our engagement party?" "Of course not. How could you even think that yesterday while you were on the run? Dad and I found a gorgeous place that would be perfect for the event. Can I ask you more about what this place is?" Betty told her daughter that the event would be held in one of the best banquet halls. It was a large area with a flower garden, mowed lawn, installed fountains, and statues. The place was quite picturesque, Yet this establishment was owned by the Flanagan family. That's how fate had played a cruel joke on Danya. In her distant childhood, she dreamed that their marriage ceremony with Benjamin would be held there. It was the most beautiful place she had ever seen in the city. Now her dream would be overshadowed. The girl timely thought about the fact that it is necessary to notify Benjamin about the change of venue of the engagement party. After all, their plan was that the event would be held at Red's house. When her mom left the room, the girl immediately grabbed the phone and dialed her lover's number. When Benjamin picked up the phone, it was clear that he was anxious about something. It turned out that he was already aware that the party would be held in their banquet hall. Despite the fact that he himself was worried, the young man tried to calm Adriana down and promised that he was thinking about further actions. The girl herself did not understand, but she believed Benjamin. She knew that he would do everything for her to be free. After calming down a bit, Adriana headed to the dining room, where the whole family was already waiting for her to have breakfast. Her parents looked as if nothing had happened yesterday at all. Michael was as serious as ever, doing his work at the table. Kathy looked at Adriana with a kind of reproachful look. "Kathy, are you in some kind of trouble? Why are you looking at me like I owe you something?" "No, sister. I just look at you and I don't understand why you're so ungrateful. You marry Fox Jr. and you look like you're marrying Gorbunov. You're telling me you'd marry him with great pleasure. If I were you, wouldn't I? As it is, you realize I don't want to get married until I'm in the family business." Adriana just rolled her eyes. She had nothing to say to that. It didn't settle in her mind why she should be grateful to her parents for selling her out either. But nevertheless, the girl tried to make the most casual look possible, continued eating breakfast, and then went to get dressed to go to the establishment where the stylists and makeup artists were waiting for her. An hour and a half later, Adriana and Betty were already there. The girl once again walked through the Grand Michaeln garden, which had fallen into her soul in her early childhood. Then she and Benjamin had run away from home to get there. The employees of the banquet hall knew that they came here secretly from their parents, but they never gave them up. They loved watching the kids and their admiring glances. Adriana stood near the fountain, remembering it all. A slight smile appeared on her face. 15 minutes later, Betty came running after her and grabbed her by the arm and dragged her inside. The woman was outraged that her daughter was being so irresponsible about tonight's event. Adriana didn't understand why there was such a rush. After all, it was more than 3 o'clock before the party. That would be enough time for the stylists and makeup artists to get all the guests in order. While Adriana got her feet behind Betty, she looked around to think of places to pull off the plan she and Benjamin had come up with. Fortunately, there were plenty of such places. Once she was sure of that, the girl calmed down and set off with peace of mind to see the stylist and makeup artists. In a small but well-staged room, 2 girls of pleasant appearance were waiting for her. They treated her very well. Every 5 minutes they checked if she liked everything. The girl loved to be treated like that by people. But unfortunately, she was 100% sure that this attitude was due to the status of her family, the status of her so-called fiancé. As Betty said, all the preparations for the party took 3 o'clock. Adriana was tired during that time, as if she had plowed the whole field of potatoes by hand. Her stylist and makeup artist wouldn't even let her go to the bathroom. They kept saying that they had very little time. The girl needed to tell Benjamin that she had found a few places that would help make their plans a reality. As soon as she rushed out to the restroom, she called Benjamin at once, telling him about the places she had reviewed. The young man listened attentively to his beloved, after which he said that she was a great girl and chose the right locations. The young man once again clarified from Tanya at what time she would organize the show, so that he could prepare himself for this moment. When they agreed on everything, Adriana hung up the phone. The girl only had to change her clothes. She knew her mother and stylist would not leave her alone. She needed to stash what Benjamin had given her yesterday. She pulled out a small roll of paper no larger than 1 by 1 centimeter and hid it in her bra. and she had purposely picked out a dress like this yesterday so she could wear it underneath. Once again, looking in the mirror, Adriana smiled to herself and whispered that everything would be fine and went to her mother's stylist. Upon entering the room, she was met with disgruntled looks from Betty and the young man who was apparently the stylist. The mother began to nag about Adriana's constant tardiness. The party might be disrupted because of her. The girl could not understand how the event could be disrupted because of her, if the groom and his family went to great lengths to make it happen. Even if Adriana had been unconscious, she would have been picked up under both arms, glasses put over her eyes, and pretended to be fine. Dressed in the very dress Adriana had picked out last night. Everyone in the room gasped. The outfit really looked great on the girl. It emphasized her beautiful curves. It hid any slight imperfections in her figure. Betty insisted that her daughter wear high heels. However, the girl was stubborn and said she would never wear them in her life. The dress was floor length, so any other shoes could be worn as they would not be visible. Betty waved at her daughter and told her to do as she saw fit. Adriana was glad that her mom gave in so quickly. It was important to her to wear the sneakers today. It would be much easier to carry out the plan she and Benjamin had in mind. When everyone was ready, she went to the window and noticed that there were already a lot of people standing near the gate. These people were clearly not invited to the event. They turned out to be reporters. The girl was pleased. They would help her escape. Cars were already pulling up to the parking lot one by one. Some of them I didn't know, but most of the cars were unfamiliar to her. At this point, Betty told her to get downstairs. It was necessary in order to greet the guests. There was no choice in the matter. So the girl agreed and immediately headed for the hall. Already in 15 minutes, the first guests came through the door. They turned out to be Adriana's aunt and uncle, as well as their children. Relatives sincerely congratulated the girl on the engagement, were interested in how they managed with Jacob to hide their relationship. In response, not only thanked and smiled embarrassedly. The girl hoped that with this arrangement the guests would not have unnecessary questions, or they would not demand an answer to the questions already asked. The aunt and uncle turned out to be very well-mannered, so they were satisfied with just a smile from their niece. Immediately after them, the guests started coming in one by one, and she didn't realize that the guests were coming in one by one. On her side and on Fox's side. When all the guests had already entered, Adriana wondered why her so-called fiancé was still not there. At one point, she felt like exhaling, thinking about maybe Fox had changed her mind about marrying her son to Adriana. As soon as that thought popped into her head, a man's hand slipped around her waist. God, Adriana, you look so beautiful today. No doubt you always look seductively strong. But today you have surpassed all my expectations. Let me kiss you. At this moment, the girl turned around and saw Jacob Fox standing in front of her. The young man did indeed look like a pompously turkey. She vaguely remembered him. Indeed, at one of the hangouts, the young man had approached her, trying to get to know her. Not that Adriana had rejected him at that moment, she just hadn't shown any particular interest. Hello, my lovely fiancé. Thank you for all the compliments you've paid me. The only thing you can kiss is my hand. You'll have access to everything else only after the wedding. Come on, Tanechka, we live in the 21st century. A bride and groom should try each other before the wedding. How can I marry you without sharing a bed with you? What if we're not right for each other in the same way? Jacob, if we're not right for each other, it's entirely your and your family's fault. You didn't expect me to jump right into bed with you after you and your father forced mine to sell me. No, sweetie. What if I'm still innocent? You see, darling, I've been saving myself all my life for my one and only husband, and as it happens, that's what you are. So you'll have to wait. But don't worry, it's only a week away. Oh, naughty girl. But that's okay. Right after the wedding, you and I will go to a hotel instead of a restaurant. And there I won't miss a single inch of your body that my fingers haven't touched. I'll explore all of you. I'll taste you in every way. You will be mine alone. Jacob hissed. I could hear the notes of anger and rage in his voice. He acted as if he were the hunter, and Adriana was his prey. After saying that, the girl smiled sweetly at him, kissed him on the temple, and turned to her parents to see their reaction. Of course, they had not heard what Jacob was saying to her. However, even a fool would have realized that there was a great tension between the two young people that was bound to come out sooner or later. Adriana was willing to tolerate exactly as long as Jacob kept his hands to himself. If it had been up to her, she would not have let him hold her this evening. But for the moment, she needed to blur the eyes of those around her. Everyone should think that they had been in love for a long time, hiding their relationship only because they were afraid of publicity. Wherever Adriana went, she was always followed by either her mother or Jacob. It is unclear for what reason they were afraid to leave her alone. Perhaps the fault of this behavior was that yesterday the girl tried to run away from home. But she was the only one who knew that she was going to leave for another city. The rest of us are just imagining it. Flanagan was also among the invited guests. Benjamin, of course, was not present. His parents were present at the party. Adriana noted what excellent actors they were. Both Benjamin's father and mother were so joyful. Their speeches sounded quite sincere, although Adriana then wondered if it was partly her own. You were really sincere. After all, thanks to the fact that the girl marries Fox Jr., their business remained intact. And wasn't it painful to realize how rotten this world was? Time was running out. Time to get into action. Guests tried time and time again to personally approach Adriana and Jacob to congratulate them on their upcoming nuptials. Even if it was all for real, the girl would be very unpleasant, because none of the invitees thought about the fact that she had basic human needs. She had been longing to go to the bathroom for the past hour and a half. When she and Jacob were approached by a married couple who were friends of the Fox family, Adriana did not hold back and said that she needed to go to the restroom. The guests were in a bit of shock, because such things are usually not said directly. But the girl no longer had the strength to humor and tried to say some veiled phrases. Once in the toilet, Adriana decided to make sure that she was alone. After walking through all the stalls and not seeing a single person, she went to the door and turned the lock so that no one could enter. The girl walked over to the sink, leaning on it with her hands, staring intently at her reflection in the mirror. Now she was facing the hardest choice of her life. Either she marries a man she doesn't know, or she takes a risk, and if successful, saves her life. Living with this pompous Manziuk, Adriana had no desire to live with. Her hand reached for her chest, penetrating under the fabric of her dress. Quickly found the necessary paper roll. Adriana held it in her hand. She was very scared. There was no guarantee that everything would end up exactly as she and Benjamin had fantasized. Unwrapping the paper wrapper, the girl saw a pill with a slight guilty tinge to it. She needed to drink it. Her hands began to shake, but there was no way out. With a single movement of her hand, Adriana popped the pill into her mouth. With her other hand, she opened the faucet, leaned over, and began to drink. There was an unpleasant taste in her mouth like most medications. The girl was afraid that the smell of the pill would be able to freak someone out, so she popped a lollipop into her mouth, which ended up in her shreds. The deed was done. Time to head to the gym. There wasn't much time left. The effects of the drug would kick in 15 minutes. In that time, Adriana had to sneak to the balcony. There were 5 balconies in the hall located on the 2nd floor, but she was not interested in all of them. She needed a specific one. The one on the left side of the entrance. It was perfect. But to get to it was much more difficult, because on the way there was a bar, behind which there were many guests who wanted to personally congratulate the future newlyweds with the upcoming wedding, and it was not necessary to send them all somehow culturally. The girl decided that she would refer to poor health. She was lucky, because most of the guests took it with understanding. Almost every woman talked about feeling the same way before the wedding. Behind her, Jacob was once again fading behind her, clinging to her more and more tightly with each passing hour. She needed to get rid of him because she was to be alone on the balcony. All her arguments and requests were not taken seriously by the young man. Jacob finally came close to his dream, so he did not want to leave her for a second. He was afraid that he would lose her again. When Adriana and Jacob were already on the balcony, the girl felt a sharp deterioration of health. It turns out that it was visible even to those around them. On the face of Jacob appeared a kind of anxiety. "Adriana, what is it? What's wrong with you? How can I help you?" Jacob's voice sounded really anxious. Adriana was surprised that this man could have such feelings. She realized that now she had the only chance to carry out her plan. "Bring some water, please." The girl barely squeezed out of herself. She was getting worse and worse by the second. She needed to get close to the necessary part of the balcony to stay where she was standing now. It only meant that the plan would be doomed to failure. Jacob gently let go of Adriana and jogged towards the bar to grab a bottle of cooling water. He didn't understand what was going on with the girl. She really did look very bad, even though she was fresher than everyone else at the beginning of the evening. As the young man tried to make his way to the bar, Adriana slowly but surely made her way to the right side of the balcony. Her consciousness behind the fog was fearful. She realized she was about to pass out. Her heartbeat became slower than usual. There was some extraneous noise in her ears. There were only a few seconds left. She could feel it. As she approached the balcony, she stepped a little over it, and after another 2 seconds, her eyes went black. "Oh my God, call an ambulance." "Jesus, poor girl. How did you do that?" "Have they started?" There are voices coming from all over the banquet hall. All the guests had flocked to the balcony. All eyes were fixed on the lawn where the body of the so-called bride lay breathless. Betty and Ethan ran up to Adriana. Her mother was rubbing her shoulders, slapping her cheeks, trying to bring her daughter to her senses. Nothing worked, however. Betty became hysterical. Tears appeared in Ethan's eyes. The man grabbed his wife, dragged her away to the corner of the building where they began to sob together in an embrace. Jacob stood on the balcony and looked at the girl's body, and the expression on his face carried sadness and grief to those around him. He couldn't believe that his happiness was so close and left him forever. "It's okay, Jacob. Don't worry. We'll find you a new wife. You found a beautiful woman. We have half of the invited guests, 10 times more beautiful than this," Adriana read. Noah Fox said in a cool voice. He wasn't surprised at all by what had happened. There was no sadness, grief, or sympathy on his face. The young man answered his father nothing, no matter what he said. Noah Fox would not have been taken seriously. By this time, an ambulance had pulled up to the establishment, and doctors ran out of it. They headed toward the body, and they bent over to feel for a pulse. They did a few more manipulations, and then they said, "Time of death, 1939. After that, a woman's scream was heard. Betty became hysterical. The only thing she kept saying was what she had told Ethan about Adriana not being left alone. No one present said anything about the fact that it was because she had been sold. The paramedics loaded Adriana's body onto a stretcher and rolled her to the ambulance forward, feet first. Everyone at the party was shocked at what had happened. In another case, people would have had the idea that it was a suicide. However, things turned out a little differently. Everyone saw that Adriana had become drastically ill. Therefore, the only reason for what happened, they considered a loss of consciousness, from which she fell over the railing of the balcony and fell on the lawn. The ambulance went to the city hospital without hurry, because there was no hurry. At this time, Betty and Ethan were beating hysterically. Their son Michael tried to calm them down so that they could go to the hospital as quickly as possible. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he was holding out hope that she would be saved now. After all, he loved his sisters so much, especially the youngest, who was always cheerful, loving, kind. When Adriana was brought to the hospital, she was immediately taken to the morgue. There was no pathologist on site, so the paramedics handed the body over to the orderlies. Logically, She should have been immediately loaded into a refrigerator. But the men did not. The paramedics asked why they had left her on the table. The paramedics replied that a pathologist would be coming soon to perform an autopsy. This answer satisfied the medical staff, who fled in an unknown direction. When the orderlies were left alone with Adriana's body, they immediately rushed to the desk. They opened the top drawer, which contained a syringe containing an unknown drug. They shouted to each other that there was no time to wait. It was necessary to do everything as quickly as possible. When one of the orderlies found the syringe, the other ran up to the body and started looking for the vein on Adriana's arm. As soon as it was found, the needle pierced it, and all the drug poured out of the syringe. After that, one of the paramedics started to perform artificial heart massage. After only 2 minutes, Adriana came to consciousness. The girl felt terrible. She had a pain in her head, back, left leg. Most likely, the injuries received after the fall from the balcony made themselves felt. When the girl opened her eyes, the paramedics began to rejoice as if she was their relative. One of the men grabbed his cell phone and started calling. Adriana could not make out his conversation, but the only thing she heard was the phrase "she was fine." She was conscious. The girls helped her up, got up from the table, took her chair. In all this time, Adriana did not utter a single word. She just didn't have the energy for it. When her breathing evened out and her heartbeat returned to normal, one of the orderlies put a mug of strong and sweet tea on the table in front of her, and the other brought a plate with pies on it. "You need to get your strength back. Eat your fill. This is all very serious. You've been through something that a lot of people don't wake up from. Let's face it, you took a very bad fall. You don't have a single fracture on you. However, the drug has weakened your body." Adriana reached for a mug of tea, made a few Gladkov. She felt a pleasant warmth spread through her body. At that moment, the door to the morgue opened. A pathologist stood on the threshold. At the sight of Adriana, he staggered. The man had come to his workplace because he had been told that the corpse of a young woman had been brought in. He had no way of knowing that the corpse would suddenly come to life and drink tea with the orderlies. "Don't worry, calm down. This is the girl we told you about yesterday. Did you forget? Oh my God, I really forgot about her. Honey, how are you feeling? Did you examine her? She doesn't have any fractures. No, she's fine." She turned out to be very lucky. To be honest, I thought their plan was doomed to fail. Apparently, she really didn't want to marry that kid. Adriana remained silent as her mouth was occupied with the pies, which at that moment were tastier than all the delicacies known in the world. She didn't yet fully know what was going on. When she and Benjamin had discussed the plan, the only part of the plan was the sound of it. The first part is the one that says that Adriana needs to specifically take a pill that will promote gradual cardiac arrest. It is because of this drug that the paramedic failed to recognize in her. It was because of this drug that the paramedic failed to recognize in her barely vulnerable pulse, which is why they pronounced her dead, and she did not know that she was to be brought to the morgue. However, she did not assume that his staff would be alerted to this. She was afraid to start talking because she felt like she would be immediately turned over to her parents as soon as they showed up on the hospital's doorstep. The orderlies kept talking among themselves, including the pathologist in the conversation. Sometimes, they marveled that in this day and age one could still find such situations where children were married to each other against their will. They called Adriana and Benjamin the real-life Romeo and Juliet. 15 minutes later, Benjamin burst through the door of the morgue. When he saw his beloved alive and unharmed, sitting wanting a brownie, he threw himself at her feet. Grabbing her hands, he began kissing them, moving higher and higher and up to her lips. The young man whispered to Adriana about how much he loved her and that he would never let her go again in his life. "Sweetheart, I realize you've been through something terrible, but we're running out of time. We have to run. Okay. Sighs." At that moment, Adriana let go of the cakes and the mug of tea. She got to her feet, staggered a little. Benjamin put his arm around her waist to help her walk to the car where she could change into normal clothes. It was a black designer dress, only drawing attention to herself. The young men said goodbye to the orderlies and pathologists, thanked them for their work and walked out. The car stood 10 meters away from the morgue. Adriana walked very slowly, as she had not yet had time to regain her strength. Benjamin picked up his lover in his arms and ran to the car. He put Adriana in the back seat so that she could change her clothes while on the road. He jumped behind the wheel and drove as fast as he could to escape from the city and then from the region. A happy life was ahead of them, with neither his nor her parents. That was the least of their worries, as in life you need to have people close to you who will never betray you.